TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution, and we didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, revolution is a way of life. Revolution is for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I got some revolutionary dinner for y'all tonight. We're going to get into some knowledge. We're talking about foundational Black Americans. Fat Joe disrespected us. Let's get into some history. Who are we? Where we come from? You know? Have we always been here? Salute, family. What's good? Let's get into it. Salute to my brother UBTB for this dynamic information that he brought to the table. Part of his series, Egyptinamerica. With that good dinner, brother. I'm finna twist it now. With everybody in the building. We've been here thousands of years. I'm gonna go check it out. You send me an email, I'm gonna check it out tonight. I'll get back with you tomorrow for sure. Salute, we in here. I most definitely got to do that. Okay, cool. Now definitely will.
There's just something exciting about uncovering the lies of the secret puppet masters. It's like the end of an episode of Scooby-Doo when they pull the mask off the villain.
Now let's see who's really behind these bandages. Dr. Najib!
In those episodes, the villain is usually just one guy. When we pull the mask off the villain, it's a whole slew of villains. It's like the entire world is in on the fix, except for the world has no idea that they are all part of it. Then we come along snatching all types of masks, and now the public puppets feel exposed. How dare you snatch the mask off my massa like that? He's a good man. He taught me about my history. It's crazy how so many people know they've been lied to about world history. But when you tell them about some of those lies, all of a sudden, you're the crazy conspiracy theorist. I can show you proof that so-called Black people have been in America for thousands of years. We could dig up the oldest burial sites on the continent full of so-called Negroes, and people would still say those Black people all came from Africa on a slave ship. Now, we know, because we've actually done research, that this is an utterly preposterous assertion, a gargantuan lie spoon-fed to the public through an ongoing psyop. But the public clings to that lie for precious oxygen, as if their life depended on it. It's like being in an abusive relationship. No matter how bad they beat your ass, you're not finna leave them.
Well, I'm asking nice.
And I'm saying no nice.
Being alone is a scary proposition, and the streets of truth are a lonely place. For most people, history is a boring subject, static in nature. Whatever happened, happened. And we've already been told what happened, so to them, there's nothing more to gain from the subject.
Roll up that good
But
dinner.
what if those things they say that happened didn't happen the way they say it did? To the truth seeker, this is an intriguing possibility. Some people simply DGAF, and we're not talking about those people. These would be the same people who tell you you're wrong about something they've never investigated for themselves. You should spend about as much time debating these people as they spend in search of the truth. And you shouldn't be surprised if you have some spare time on your hands. It's like arguing with a monkey about who came from who. Your time is better spent elsewhere. Besides, if you believe you came from a monkey, but America is Egypt is incomprehensible, maybe this isn't the message for you.
Facts. They're not ready for
And really, this is the problem with the world historical narrative in general. It's boxed in by their asinine theories. It's ironic how so many people who assert a belief in God adopt the statutes of godless heathens. Hey, bro, I didn't come from no monkey, but all mankind came from Africa. Nigga, you are an oxyafro moron, a coonigma, a contradiction. You can't have it both ways. You locked into every leg of that parlay, big dog. You can't cherry pick which part of the out of Africa theory you like the most, because if you remove even a single card, the entire house collapses upon itself. And if a house can't collapse so easily, surely you could consider an alternative to their history. And if you can consider an alternative to their history, why not, at least for a second, consider the Torah and Tanakh as an alternate history book? You could literally consider the book fiction and still learn more about world history than is taught in any school anywhere, because that very same world history that is taught in schools is based upon the very same work of fiction you consider the Old Testament to be. The only difference is they perverted the information in the Bible to fit their deceptive template. When I say Egypt, the first thing most people think of are the pyramids of Giza. But those pyramids don't have anything to do with the Old Testament, even though they are supposedly older than the Torah itself. There are no reliable accounts of the pyramids from the Old Testament or Torah, or even the New Testament for that matter. But through the perversion of the standardized education system, we have all been implanted with this pyramid scheme, pun intended, that has no biblical validity, although people think it does. The descriptions given of so-called Egypt from the Old Testament could have never happened in the location of modern Egypt. In this installment, I present even more evidence that not only is America Egypt, but also the ancient Holy Land, based on descriptions given in the Torah and Tanakh.
Can you deal with it?
Revolutionary salute to our brother Richard Chavis for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Appreciate the love, family. Salute to you.
No matter what they do, they can't stop us. They can't stop us. Nah, they can't stop us. Yeah. We ain't build no slave ship. We ain't make those anchors. We ain't plot those grave sites up since daylight. Burdened by the things we try to make right. It's gonna be a late night. So much turmoil makes my blood boil. Kundalini, encore. Earth is some raw. Dirt is unsoiled. With one core, tell a story that some spoil. Watch it unfold. Stories untold. Copyright unsold. Books with one spine. Ghosts with one soul. They want control. You want control. But we share one goal. We fight one foe. Set your front door. And it keeps knocking, but the people kept rocking. Yeah. It keeps knocking, but the people kept rocking. Yeah. Stop, flex, whatever they do. They can't stop, keep knocking. Yeah, yeah. They can't stop us. No, nah, they can't stop us. No, they can't stop us.
Let's refocus our attention on the American Southwest. We have discussed many characteristics of this region in previous episodes and the past history of the tribes of this region, and even some of the archaeological sites of this region. But this area is so chock full of hidden history, it's impossible to cover everything. It should not be overlooked that this region was once home to a massive population of people and differently stratified and structured civilizations. These various people have been left abandoned by the history books as if they never existed. And yet these various megacities of the American Southwest have a far larger civilizational footprint than even the largest cities in Eurasia and Africa, where they routinely overestimate the populations of cities like Alexandria, Memphis, London, and Rome. They routinely underestimate the populations of cities like Cahokia, Big Mound, Chichen Itza, Cholula, and Tenochtitlan, just to name a few. All cities in America larger than even their largest cities don't seem to play a role in their special world history. But who could blame them? It's not like America even existed to them 2,000 years ago. Have you seen a map from a first century European? Have you seen a Strabo map? Have you seen the Eratosthenes map? Have you seen a Ptolemy map? These were the standards of old world cartography. Taking a serious look at this map, we could not take these maps seriously, and yet they are held as the standard, and this was the world according to them. On some of these old world maps of Egypt, you'll be hard pressed to find even one pyramid. When they've taken the time to illustrate animals, trees, churches, and farms, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Must be why they couldn't take 7 seconds to illustrate a pyramid accurately. But that's beside the point. The point is that our version of history is relatively a new thing. So the attention to chronological detail is essential in order to unfold the fuckery. If world history happened the way they said it did, then Egypt should have been well known long before 1800. But it wasn't. The most glaring omission from the history of ancient Egypt being the location of Egypt in the Bible is the absolute zero evidence of the Exodus or even Hebrew habitation, which would literally be impossible if this place was the place they say it is. How is there zero evidence for the Exodus? Now, a person could simply just say that the Exodus never existed and the whole story is made up. But then you would have the problem of everything associated with that biblical account being void, basically meaning that the subsequent histories and locations of all associated elements are now non-existent. Basically meaning you should be open to the idea of some sort of fabrication. This assertion alone is enough to literally destroy any evidence of anything biblically connected in the entire region. And I'm not just talking about Egypt. The area they proposed was the land of Goshen, the place where the Israelites began their journey, is literally less than 200 miles from Jerusalem present day, and less than 150 miles from the border of Israel. But there is no evidence for the Exodus or even a significant population of ancient Hebrews in either location. That would seem impossible considering their close proximity to each other. We can find pudding-faced niggas in Indiana, but no Hebrews in Egypt? there's obviously some fuckery amiss. The Exodus was a monumental event. Most estimates state that the number of people participating in the Exodus was over 2 million, including over 600,000 fighting men, according to Exodus 12:37. So how is there no evidence for 2 million Hebrews from a place whose largest city was barely 50,000 people? Not only that, but there's no evidence of any Israelite habitation less than 150 miles from Israel. Somebody please make that make sense, because it doesn't. We know that through the narrative of trade connections in the ancient world, the Egyptians traded with the Mesopotamians thousands of miles away, but there's still no evidence of any relationship between two closer places in Israel and Egypt anywhere in the archaeological record. How, Sway?
Or do you want to marginalize me till I'm out of my moment?
Or why don't you empower yourself and don't need them and do it yourself?
How, Sway?
Take a few steps back to go.
You ain't got the answers, man. You ain't got the answers.
Walk with me to right sides. Come share the love you have. See visions of your love come true. No love is waiting there just for you.
Welcome back to Charlatan's Web, sources and parallels of the Exodus. Let's consult the charlatans and their ideas of what happened with the Exodus. The Exodus is the founding myth of the Israelites. The scholarly consensus is that the Exodus, as described in the Torah, is not historical, even though there may be a historical core behind the biblical narrative. So even the idea of looking at the Torah as a history book can't really be taken seriously, is what they're saying. Modern archaeologists believe that the Israelites were indigenous to Canaan and were never in ancient Egypt, which is interesting in itself, considering where they say Canaan was. So the proximity of Canaan and ancient Egypt is less than 200 miles. That's like saying, if you live in DC, you've never been to New York. No one from DC has ever been to New York, apparently. No one from Atlanta has ever been to Charlotte. That's the literal proximity of these places that we're talking about. But modern archaeologists say that the Israelites have never been in Egypt. Continuing, and if there's any historical basis to the Exodus, it can apply only to a small segment of the population of Israelites at large. Nevertheless, it is also commonly argued that some historical event may have inspired these traditions. Even if Moses and the Exodus narrative belong to the collective cultural memory rather than history. Let me read that again. Even if Moses and the Exodus narrative belong to the collective cultural memory rather than history. You see how these stories become legends, and then sometimes people adopt other people's legends for their own, or they reappropriate it, or they rewrite it. According to Avraham Faust, most scholars agree that the narrative has a historical core and that some of the highland settlers came one way or another from Egypt. I don't really know what that means, okay? Avraham Faust. Sounds like one of those guys. Oh, he's an Israeli archaeologist. I've heard that nigga's name before. Avraham Faust. Egyptologist Jan Assman. Nice name. Egyptologist Jan Assman suggests that the Exodus narrative combines, among other things, the expulsion of the Hyksos, the religious revolution of Akhenaten, the experiences of the Habiru, and the large-scale migrations of the Sea Peoples into a coherent story that is fictional as to its composition, but historical as to some of its components. So you see what they're saying? They're saying that the Exodus narrative was taken from all of these people. The Hyksos, possibly a little of Akhenaten, maybe some Habiru, and this came together with the large migrations of the Sea Peoples. So you can see how they're using the mythological basis as a foundation for the story itself, as opposed to being necessarily historical from the standpoint of being true in their definition, because they're looking for historical evidence in this place where none exists. Therefore, the story doesn't exist. The consensus among modern scholars is that the Torah does not give an accurate account of the origins of the Israelites. There's no indications that the Israelites ever lived in ancient Egypt, and the Sinai Peninsula shows almost no signs of any occupation for the entire second millennium BC. Even Kadesh Barnea, where the Israelites were said to have spent 38 years, was uninhabited prior to the early 12th century BCE. In contrast to the absence of evidence for the Egyptian captivity and wilderness wanderings, there are ample signs of Israel's evolution within Canaan from native Canaanite roots. Where a few scholars continue to discuss the historicity, or at least plausibility, of the Exodus story, the majority of archaeologists have abandoned it, in the phrase used by archaeologist William Dever as a fruitless pursuit. The majority of archaeologists have abandoned it, in the phrase used by archaeologist William Dever as a fruitless pursuit. The biblical narrative contains some details which are authentically Egyptian, but such details are scant, and the story frequently does not reflect Egypt of the late Bronze Age, or even Egypt at all. It is unlikely, for example, that a mother would place a baby in the reeds of the Nile, where it would be in danger from crocodiles. Such elements of the narrative can be fitted into the second millennium, could only belong to the first, consistent with a first millennium BCE writer trying to set an old story in Egypt. And this would be true about the script of the Bible as well. As languages change, so do the meanings of words change, especially with the Torah, which was an oral version of these stories that later became written. And most writing at this time was a consequence of trade, or one speaking people having a communication with a people who spoke a different language, by people who weren't the same people, by people who did not speak the same language. That's why these are called translations. Continuing, according to Exodus 12, the Israelites numbered about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children, plus a mixed multitude and livestock. Numbers gives a more precise number of 603,550 men aged 20 and up. It is difficult to reconcile the idea of 600,000 Israelite fighting men with the formation that the Israelites were afraid of the Philistines and Egyptians. The 600,000 plus wives and children, the elderly, and the mixed multitude of non-Israelites would have numbered some 2 to 2.5 million. Marching 10 abreast without accounting for livestock, they would have formed a column about 144 miles long. At the tradition of time setting for this putative event, Egypt's population would have been estimated to be in the range of 3 to 4.5 million. No evidence has been found that Egypt ever suffered the demographic and economic catastrophe such a loss of population would represent, nor that the Sinai Desert ever hosted or could have hosted these millions of people and their herds. Some have rationalized these numbers in smaller figures, for example, reading the Hebrew as 600 families rather than 600,000 men. But all such solutions have their own set of problems, end quote. The biggest problem with this is the sheer growth of the Israelite population from the generations of Jacob to the Exodus. How could this number have grown to over 600,000 fighting men, just the men, who were supposedly Israelites? Is it plausible for 12 men to go to 600,000 men in such a short amount of time? Hey, you gotta do a lot of fucking to put them kind of numbers out. Them Wilt Chamberlain numbers. Most archaeologists and Egyptologists agree the Exodus is not a verifiable event due to the lack of evidence found in Egypt. They all see it as mythological with no substantial historical value. Well, the same could be said about other sites as well. They claim to be the true locations of the Old Testament. The point here isn't to argue the historicity of the Exodus necessarily, but rather show you how and why these places are not what they claim them to be. And their methods for determining these locations are not only fraudulent, but downright stupid. Most of these so-called biblical locations point to a well-orchestrated Christian hoax. It seems as though Christians were looking to reappropriate and relocate biblical locations for themselves. Take Helena of Constantinople, for example. She was Constantine's mother. And of course, Constantine was the first Roman emperor to become a Christian and initiate the widespread of Christian propaganda throughout Rome with the Council of Nicaea and the Creed of Constantinople, as the narrative goes. It was his mother, Saint Helena, who supposedly discovered the true cross, which is allegedly the cross Christ was crucified upon. There are too many holes in that story to just name one, but the biggest hole in the story is the fact that Jerusalem had long been destroyed and abandoned for over 300 years between the crucifixion and Constantine. This location, for all intents and purposes, was created by newly Hellenized Christians to give Roman Christians a holy land, rather than Jews or Muslims who had yet to be invented yet in that part of the world. The Muslims weren't a thing until 300 years later, and the Khazar Jews didn't convert to Judaism until 400 years later. These sites denote the beginning of Christianity in Rome. They literally just chose a spot and called it Jerusalem, with no evidence to solidify that claim. But they didn't need any. They were making it all up anyway. What did early classical Christians know about the Old Testament? They didn't even know about Christianity. And the New Testament wasn't even a thing at the time. So they had the same creative license as George Lucas. To add even more ridiculousness to the story, Constantine's mama ordered the construction of the St. Catherine Monastery at the foot of Mount Sinai. Allegedly, they enclosed the burning bush in a building called St. Helen's Chapel. That's right, they enclosed the burning bush, allegedly, in St. Helen's Chapel. This was the location they chose for Mount Sinai. Let's keep this in mind. This location was chosen over 1,000 years after the Exodus. And there's no evidence that these Romans had ever known any of these biblical locations. They weren't even named until the early Christian era. Remember, Rome had supposedly been in Egypt since the days of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. And ironically, Harry Hubbard says that he has found relics in Illinois with depictions of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. But no Roman could read hieroglyphics until after 1820, much less Phoenician, Canaanite, or Assyrian. All of these languages weren't translated by Europeans until after the 19th and 20th centuries. They have never provided any tangible evidence for these locations other than their supreme, unquestioned church authority. Does anyone really think that this is the actual site of Mount Sinai, especially after knowing how this location came about? Now, these biblical archaeologists are forced to put a square peg into a round hole. Have you seen the proposed Exodus routes? Some archaeologists have tried to recreate the route from the desert and through the wilderness based upon the proposed locations of the Exodus events. Let's just say, not only are these proposals preposterous, there's also no evidence to suggest that these places have ever been as such. No documentation of Hebrew habitation, no script, no artifacts, only the boxed-in theories of the charlatan biblical hierarchy. Another huge problem for them is the fact that this area doesn't topographically, zoologically, or geologically match the descriptions given of Egypt in the Bible. With all this being said, let's take a look at America to see the most biblically plausible or suitable location for the events of the Exodus. Based upon previously established locations, at the top would be the Cedar of Lebanon, representing the Pacific Northwest from Northern California to as far north as British Columbia, with other trees like the bristlecone pine indicating the edge of the desert. The Red Sea being the extension or dried northern portion of the Gulf of California, the same area the Red Sea is located on the older maps of the island of California. The most suitable location of the Exodus is within the Mojave or Colorado and possibly the Sonoran and Great Basin deserts of the Southwest United States and Northwest Mexico. This area far more accurately parallels the descriptions given in the Old Testament. The most important landmark pertaining to the Exodus is the Red Sea. The problem for most biblical historians as it relates to the Red Sea is that the sea never plays a role again in the narrative throughout all the histories of the Old Testament. When the sea is mentioned in the later histories of the Old Testament, it is a reminder of the Exodus past event, not playing a role in the concurrent story. Charlatans often conflate the Egyptian sea mentioned in Isaiah 11 with the Red Sea, but that assertion would literally kill their geographic templates for the Nile or the Euphrates. Of the over 24 purported mentions of the Red Sea, the only other time it is mentioned contemporaneously with the events of the text is during the time of Solomon and Hiram during the construction of the temple. 1 Kings 9:26 states Solomon had a navy, a fleet of ships in Ezion-Geber, which is beside Elath on the shore of the Red Sea. The other later mention in Jeremiah 49 mentioned the Red Sea as to where cries can be heard. The other mentions are calls for remembrance. But for the most part, the sea is no longer mentioned as part of the biblical storyline. Why is that? Being so centrally located within the alleged biblical landscape, it is hard to believe that the Red Sea never played a role in the later days after the fall of Israel. Wars of the Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, the Greek, and Rome, none of these nations traveled that sea again during the rest of the entire biblical narrative. It went from the most important sea to never being used again. It's almost like the Red Sea disappeared. What happened to the Red Sea? There are multiple examples in the later books of Joshua and Psalms that suggest the sea had dried up. Whatever the story may be concerning the Red Sea in the later days, it never appears again as part of the concurrent story. Its last mention within the story is only to establish a location for Solomon's army at Ezion-Geber, which is located on the Red Sea by Edom. This mention is notable because if we use the modern alleged location of Ezion-Geber at the Gulf of Aqaba, the navigational route from Tyre or Lebanon to Ezion-Geber would have been around the entire continent of Africa. So for Hiram of Tyre to reach Ezion-Geber, he would have to circumnavigate the entire continent. Not impossible, but an absurd course nonetheless. This was never mentioned as a shipping route in the Old Testament, and no other mentions of the Red Sea are concurrent with later storylines. This brings us to the only other evidence from the archaeological world concerning the existence of Ezion-Geber. This is important because there hasn't been any evidence found in the place on the Gulf of Aqaba said to be Ezion-Geber, linking it to that location. The Pariyaba stone is the only archaeological evidence discovered substantiating the existence of Ezion-Geber, and it was found in Brazil. The inscription says the men were Sidonian Canaanites from the land of the mercantile king. They sacrificed a child to the celestial gods and goddesses in the 19th year of Hiram, king of Tyre. They were on a voyage for 2 years around the land of Ham, which is supposedly Africa. They were stranded and had lost communication with the other ships on their voyage. If they were circumnavigating Africa, how did they end up in Brazil? Once again, this isn't impossible. I guess they could have gotten blown across the entire ocean. But wouldn't it make more sense that they were blown off course circumnavigating South America, especially if they had ended up in Brazil? Some of the earliest maps of America show the area where Panama is today being submerged underwater. In my estimation, Ezion-Geber is most likely located near the mouth of today's Colorado River on the edge of Edom, which literally means colored red, aka Colorado, which is a literal synonym of the word Edom. When most people think of Colorado, they think of the Rockies, but the etymology of Colorado lends itself more to the Four Corners region in the southwest portion of the state. The red cliffs and canyons of Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and New Mexico are geological indicators of the land of Edom, as mentioned in the Old Testament. We know this simply by grouping the natural features of the land. It would have to be in the vicinity of the Red Sea, but also close to other natural features we have already mentioned, like the desert fir tree or even the bristlecone pine. Edom was the land originally inhabited by Seir the Horite. Many historians say the word Horite indicates one of a few things. It could mean cave dweller, cliff dweller, a non-human of some sort, or simply the white race. Timnah and Alohibama, who were wives or concubines of Eliphaz, son of Esau. And Timnah was the mother of Amalek, the progenitor of the Amalekites. They are described by rabbinical scholars by their etymology, meaning people who drink blood. These ancient blood-sucking rituals are still being practiced in Edom even unto this day. From Lake Havasu, Arizona to Colorado Springs, this ancient demonic practice is said to have been passed down through the generations by a priesthood of old world shaman who are said to have lived in this area as natives since the times of antiquity, and who are speculated to be the bloodline descendants of the fallen. Also, with the presence of massive underground cave systems and cliff dwellings in the area, all of these aspects make this area an even more suitable location for ancient Edom. Add in the sheer amount of paranormal activity and deep underground military bases, this area is a magnet for the practice of witchcraft and black magic. Have you ever heard of Dragonfest, or the Witches' Ball, or the several dozen other festivals of necromancy and witchcraft? These people not only used caves for their rituals, they would use mountains as well to make their sacrifices, just like the high places referred to in the Tanakh. The people who practice this now know that this was a practice in America long before Eurasians arrived. These ancient cult rituals weren't brought by Eurasians, they were taught to Eurasians, many of whom are descendants of Edom, especially those of crypto-Jewish ancestry. A detail about the Exodus that most people find mythological or just simply do not believe is the presence of giants. During the Exodus, there are mentioned at least 3 nations of giants, also known as Rephaim, who were the descendants of the Nephilim, aka the fallen angels from the book of Genesis. Deuteronomy chapter 2 relates that the Elim dwelt in Moab during past times. They were a great and many people, as tall as the Anakims, who were also accounted as giants. Also accounted in the land of giants were the Zamzumims. Another giant mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 3 is the Amorite king Og of Bashan, described as the remnant of giants. According to Deuteronomy, there are nations of giants who used to inhabit the land, so let's take a trip into the realm of mythology and mystery. Now, if you were to ask any scholastic charlatan about the existence of giants, they'll scoff and tell you they never existed. That every account of a giant human-sized skeleton found anywhere is a hoax. The subject of ancient giants was a well-known secret in America over 100 years ago. At the turn of the century, giants were being found everywhere. So for the purposes of research, let's take a look at some of these supposed hoaxes. America isn't the only place where giants have been found. There have been giants found on other continents. The point here is to show that there were races of giants living in America, more particularly the Southwest United States. And also to show you that in these areas have been excavated the greatest number of giants found anywhere in the world. And there are also giants that have been found all over the United States, including in the Ohio region, the Wisconsin region, the Michigan region, the Florida region, even in Georgia and West Virginia, and even in Pennsylvania. So when we look at these stories today, we all take them as hoaxes. Quote from 1902, archaeologists send expedition to explore graveyards in New Mexico where bodies were unearthed. Owing to the discovery of the remains of a race of giants in Guadalupe, New Mexico, antiquarians and archaeologists are preparing an expedition further to explore that region. This determination is based on the excitement that exists among people of a scope of the country near Mesa Rico, about 200 miles southeast of Las Vegas, where an old burial ground has been discovered that has yielded skeletons of enormous size. The first part of this paragraph is interesting because they're explaining how they've already found the remains of a race of giants in Guadalupe, New Mexico, and that archaeologists are preparing to further explore that region. This is already a bygone conclusion. So since they found giants in that area, they're excited about what else could be found in that area, and that's in Guadalupe, New Mexico. Luciana Quintana, on whose ranch the ancient burial plot was located, discovered two stones that bore curious inscriptions. And beneath those stones were found in shallow excavations the bone of a frame that could not have been less than 12 feet in length. The men who opened the grave say the forearm was 4 feet long, and that in a well-preserved jaw, the lower teeth ranged from the size of a hickory nut to that of the largest walnut in size. The chest of the being is reported as having a circumference of 7 feet. That's a wide body. Quintana, who has uncovered many other burial places, expresses the opinion that perhaps thousands of skeletons of a race of giants long extinct will be found. This supposition is based on the traditions handed down from the early Spanish invasion that have detailed knowledge of the existence of a race of giants that inhabited the plains of what is now eastern New Mexico. Indian legends and carvings also in the same section indicate the existence of such a race, end quote. And this was published in the New York Times in 1902. I know many people think the New York Times is a legitimate newspaper. They'll say if it's not published in the New York Times, I don't believe it. Well, here it is, published in the New York Times. Quote, race of primeval giants, New York, Tuesday. Quote, recent excavations made under the supervision of the faculty of Stanford University, California, indicate that the entire peninsula south of San Francisco was once inhabited by a race of giants. Professor Harold Heath of the zoological department of the university, according to a statement just given out by the faculty, has unearthed about 2 miles distant from the university several skeletons of men who were of great height and build. The prehistoric village, covering near 2 acres in the area, was the scene of Professor Heath's investigations. Stone hammers, bone owls, and ornaments found by his party indicate that the owners had attained considerable advancement in artisanship and civilization, end quote. So this is from the faculty at Stanford University. Uncovered a race of giants 2 miles south of the university. Ancient giants used to inhabit San Francisco.
He said Bonds drilled a ball, just annihilated it, but right to the second baseman who turned it into a double play the first time he faced him. Bond swings, and there it goes. It's headed for McCovey Cove. It is gone, a home run.
Ancient giants used to inhabit San Francisco.
A shot that took 2 seconds to get out of here, over the wall, over the arcade, over everything. 2-1 Giants.
Quote, Days of the Giants, a skeleton relic of ideal prehistoric men. Quote, a huge skeleton of a man bearing indications of a prehistoric race have been discovered at Fort Garland, Colorado. The bones were in a remarkable state of preservation and were evidently those of the period when the mammoth roamed the mountains of the Sangre de Cristo and Sierra Blanca. The skull, bones of one arm, both legs, and the spinal cord were intact. Measurements showed the man to be 7 feet 2 inches. The lower jawbone is sufficiently large to cover entirely the jaw of an average man today. So they're saying they discovered a giant of a man who's 7 feet 2 inches. And we don't really look at people who are 7 feet 2 inches as another race of people today. I mean, that's probably 10% of the NBA. Most people look at Shaquille O'Neal as a human. Most people look at Victor Wembanyama as a human. are these giants are larger than average humans. Quote, The World, October 6th, 1895. Biggest giant ever known, 9 feet high, and probably a prehistoric California Indian. Measurement well authenticated. Other big men and women of fact and fable who are famous types of gigantism. Quote, the corpse of the biggest man that ever lived has been dug up near San Diego, California. At all events, there's no satisfactory record in ancient or modern history of any human being nearly so tall. The mummy, for in such conditions the remains were found, is that of a person who must have been about 9 feet high in life. This makes allowance for the shrinkage, which may be pretty closely calculated. As to the accuracy in the estimate, there can be no question, as the cadaver has been carefully inspected and measured by Professor Thomas Wilson, curator of the Department of Prehistoric Anthropology in the Smithsonian Institution, and by other scientists. Oh, so the Smithsonian has actually authenticated the credibility of this giant. But according to the Smithsonian, there are no giants. Imagine all of the things that are being hidden by the Smithsonian. If you could go to the vault of the Smithsonian, you would probably find giants and minotaurs and dwarves and fairies and hybrids of all types. Why hasn't the Smithsonian ever spoken about the giants? We know they've never even heard of G.E. Kincaid, the man who supposedly found the Egyptian city in the Grand Canyon. They've never heard of him. And just like all of these artifacts that do not fit into their historical narrative, when they're given to the Smithsonian, they disappear. What happened to it? What happened to all the giants that were given to the Smithsonian? There are several accounts of people finding giants and having the giants sent to the Smithsonian, never to be heard from again. So we know we have races of giants between California and New Mexico, and of course other areas. But the point here is to show that this region in the Southwest has the highest concentration of giants found and excavated anywhere in the world. Because in other areas, when giants are being excavated, in most cases, they're single giants. Now, I do know of some examples, especially in the eastern United States and Ohio and Pennsylvania country, where graveyards of supposed giants were discovered. And when we're saying giants, they're describing these burials averaging 7 feet tall, some as tall as 8 feet. So we're not talking about 30-foot men or 40-foot men. We're talking about, the size of an NBA center. It's also important to pay attention to the measurements as well, where these giants may be a lot wider, a lot bigger, a lot thicker. They may have a protruded brow. However, in the Southwest United States, where the highest concentration of giant burials have been found, these burial sites may have hundreds of giants that are averaging over 9 feet in height. This picture here is probably one of the more famous pictures of giants. We can see the man standing beside the giant that was found, supposedly a California Indian, or supposedly a giant of many giants found in that area in California. So if you've ever done any research on giants, at some point you have probably seen this picture. Quote, giant skeletons found on coast, Los Angeles, California. William Derbyshire and Jack Stoneberger of Chicago and Robert Derbyshire of Santa Monica contractors have unearthed the skeleton of a giant prehistoric man at Santa Monica Beach. The skeleton was over 9 feet in height. Hard work uncovered 13 more similar skeletons. 3 perfect specimens were brought to Santa Monica for exhibition, and scientists who have examined them say they undoubtedly are hundreds of years old. The skulls have formation of an Indian head with high cheekbones and other pronounced characteristics. In every case, the teeth are practically intact. Santa Monica, giants found 9 feet tall. 1 giant found, 13 others found. Wouldn't you know it, another article from the San Diego Union, trace of giants found in desert. Quote, a retired doctor has discovered relics of an ancient civilization whose men were 8 or 9 feet tall in the Colorado desert near the Arizona, Nevada, California line. And associates said today, Howard E. Hill of Los Angeles, speaking before the Transportation Club, disclosed that several well-preserved mummies were taken yesterday from the caverns in an area roughly 180 miles squared, extending through much of southern Nevada from Death Valley, California, across the Colorado River into Arizona. The rest of this article is too hard to read. They were discovered and were clothed in garments of some animal that they do not know exactly what it is, as an animal unknown today. But mainly the point here is being that the remnants of a civilization where mummies were found that were 8 to 9 feet tall on the Arizona, Nevada, California line. Quote, this was indeed a giant. Yesterday, a fragment of a human skeleton was brought to Carson, Nevada from Pine Grove near Genoa. The original skeleton must have been fully 25 feet long. The bone was a portion of the leg below the knee. At the point where it joined the knee was 8 inches across, or 5 times the usual size. The fragment was about 2 feet long, splendidly preserved, and weighed about 20 pounds. All the local physicians agree that it is unquestionably a portion of the skeleton of the largest human remains yet discovered. Parties are going to Pine Grove to search for the rest of the skeleton. So they found a bone, and they're like, well, if this is the bone I think it is, then this guy's really tall. Usually, if I want something to be seen as more credible, I need to come with a fully intact skeleton, or at least a more fully intact skeleton. It's like the thing they do with the dinosaurs, where they find a pinky bone, and they'll be like, yes, this pinky bone came off a T-Rex. Like, nigga, you have never found a fully intact T-Rex. You've never just seen a T-Rex buried in the ground with all of its bones intact. This could have very well been the remnant of a giant, but finding one bone isn't as convincing as finding an intact skeleton. Quote from the Smithsonian, they found giants in China, nigga. The Smithsonian, hey, they finally came clean. After all these years, we've been thinking the Smithsonian's hiding shit. Turns out we just haven't been reading. Graveyard of giants found in China. Yes. Now this is a discovery, Smithsonian. It's about damn time. Many of these 5,000-year-old skeletons measured 5'9" or longer, making the Neolithic humans exceptionally tall for that period. Hold on. Graveyard of giants found in China. Many of the 5,000-year-old skeletons measured 5'9" or longer. All right, Smithsonian. I don't even want to read the article. I guess 5'9" is a giant in China. We know the Chinese are notoriously short, so I guess 5'9" would be considered a giant in China. All All right. Nothing to see here. Nothing to see. The next place we want to highlight is Elim, the place during the Exodus where was located 12 fountains of water and 70 palm trees. A problem for the biblical archaeologist who claims that this location is on the Sinai Peninsula in modern-day Egypt is the fact that there is no evidence of this place anywhere in the vicinity. The biggest oasis in Egypt is to the west and nowhere near the Red Sea or the Exodus route. When we compare this area to the region around the Mojave Desert, there is really no comparison. There are more natural springs of several different types in just this area than the entire country of Egypt. In fact, San Bernardino, California has more springs alone than all of Egypt. Include the surrounding areas like San Diego, Riverside, Palm Springs, Palo Verde, Crystal Spring, Borrego Springs, and the literal hundreds to thousands of springs located in and around the Mojave Great Basin and Colorado deserts. And we have yet to mention the numerous springs in Nevada and Arizona. Geologists say that there are over 4,000 natural springs in the state of Arizona alone. I approximate that the biblical location of Elim is somewhere near the vicinity of the Palm Desert, the Coachella Valley, Borrego Springs, or San Bernardino, California. This area seems the most probable location. These springs would be hugging the border of the Red Sea, as described in the Exodus. And if we look at the location of the Red Sea on the older maps of the island of California, this is a perfect location. This area is home to several different types of springs, from mineral springs to thermal springs to freshwater springs, carbonated springs, even artesian wells. Not just in the San Bernardino area, even in Los Angeles, there are several natural springs. This is a random question, but I always wondered why they called the medical center in Los Angeles Cedars-Sinai. The medical center was literally named after the cedars of Lebanon, but it's located in California. Now, of course, the center was founded by a crypto-Jewish businessman in 1902. And in 1918, other crypto-Jews opened Mount Sinai Hospital, and in 1961, they merged together into Cedars-Sinai. I just think the naming of this hospital is intriguing, especially considering what we know about the Exodus. In my opinion, I think this medical center was named Cedars-Sinai for a more intentional and clandestine reason. Knowing what we know now, we can see that the hospital is somewhere in the region of the Cedars of Lebanon and Mount Sinai. Many of these places and names have hidden meanings. Think about the location of all the springs in the Palm Desert and the Mojave Desert. And just like Cedars-Sinai, many of these springs are in the vicinity of Joshua Tree National Park. But why is it called Joshua Tree? Apparently, it was those damn Mormons again. You know how they do. Always looking to muddy the biblical waters, pun intended, to find any little nugget of evidence that will substantiate the Book of Mormon. So as the narrative goes, in the mid to late 1850s, a group of Mormons traveling out west named the trees in this area Joshua trees after Joshua of the Old Testament. However, it's important to note that this story can't be substantiated by anyone, including the National Park Service or Joshua Tree historians. So although there's been speculation that the Mormons named Joshua Tree, it's only speculation, and there's no actual connection between Mormons and the naming of Joshua Tree. The name is still unto this day surrounded in mythology. Given what we know today about the Exodus and this area in California being more topographically suited, one can clearly see how Joshua had stepped foot somewhere in the vicinity of Joshua Tree National Park. Accompanying the Joshua Tree within the park is a most unusual granite rock formation, almost resembling ancient walls. Could these have been the walls of Jericho? According to biblical geography, Jericho should actually be located much further from this region, to the north and to the east. So this location doesn't exactly fit into the biblical geographic template, but it is an interesting characteristic nonetheless. Another interesting characteristic in Joshua Tree National Park and the rock formations is the appearance of this huge megaphone on top of one of the formations. No one has claimed responsibility for putting it there, and most historians agree that this megaphone has been here far longer than most people have been settling in the California region. Just imagine an army of Israelites using shofars made from the horns of bighorn sheep and blowing the shofar and using cymatics to melt the walls of Jericho. The initial point is that all of these locations are not named by mistake. There are always clues hidden inside the etymology. So the long-held rumor that the Mormons actually named Joshua Tree Park can't be substantiated by any historian of the subject. But when you inject Mormons into the equation, the math always gets a little funny. Because we have seen throughout this series that Mormons and their biblically or Book of Mormon related discoveries are always taken to be a fraud or a hoax. And this is what the charlatan usually does when a discovery is made in the American Southwest or anywhere on the American continent that contradicts their historical narrative or their rigid transatlantic contact theories. According to them, any single shred of evidence pointing to an ancient Hebrew or Egyptian or Assyrian habitation anywhere in America is a hoax. And the number one culprit is always a Mormon, even if the artifact in question wasn't discovered by a Mormon. Take the Los Lunas Decalogue Stone of New Mexico, for example. This stone wasn't found or discovered by any Mormons, but Mormons have been blamed for the fabrication of this particular stone. They just inject the Mormon narrative, and all of a sudden, the object or artifact loses credibility. Quote, skeleton found showing giants roamed Sierras. Sacramento, October 28th, quote, the recent discovery of a skeleton near MacArthur, Shasta County, believed to be that of a prehistoric giant who stumbled and was caught by a lava flow from Mount Lassen, has again given rise to the question, was California inhabited by human beings millions of years ago? The answer of scientists to this question, as far as preliminary investigations go, is yes. The Great Valley of California geologists have found apparently existed much as at the present time since man's earliest known appearance on Earth. Article goes on to say how geologists say that much of the flora and fauna seem to have retained their essential elements for hundreds of thousands of years, in a sense where California could have some of the oldest flora and fauna in the world. Continuing, the Shasta County skeleton was discovered about 12 feet under lava rock, being excavated by a steam shovel. The skull was well preserved, as well as several of the larger bones. It is believed that the man was taken over by the great lava flow that once spread over Modoc County and into Oregon and Idaho. Although this is far north of the Great Central Valley, geological data has shown that the area has offered a suitable habitat for man since the earliest Pleistocene age. Since this is true, said a report of Schneck and Dawson, and since ethnologists are convinced that California has been occupied by man from remote times, it seems possible that the alluvial fill in the vicinity of the area may yet reveal archaeological evidence of these early inhabitants, end quote. So this is another skeleton found in the Sierras near Mount Shasta. Charlatan's Web quote: "The Lost Lunas Decalogue stone is a hoax." They just go ahead and tell you it's a hoax associated with a large boulder on the side of Hidden Mountain near Los Lunas, New Mexico, about 35 miles south of Albuquerque. That area is a hotspot of conspiratorial ancient findings and discoveries. 35 miles south of Albuquerque that bears a 9-line inscription carved into a flat panel. The stone is also known as the Los Lunas Mystery Stone or Commandment Rock. The stone has gained notoriety in that some claim the inscription is pre-Columbian and therefore proof of early Shemitic contact with the Americas. Standard archaeological evidence contradicts this, however. There you go. Hit you with the double caveat. It's a hoax, and archaeological evidence contradicts this. Of course it does. Of course it does. The first recorded mention of the stone is in 1933 when Professor Frank Hibben, an archaeologist from the University of New Mexico, saw it. According to a 1996 interview, Hibben was convinced the inscription is ancient and thus authentic. He reported that he first saw the text in 1933. At the time, it was covered with lichen and patination and was hardly visible. He claimed he was taken to the site by a guide who claimed he had seen it as a boy back in the 1880s. However, Hidden's testimony is tainted by charges that in at least 2 separate incidents, he fabricated some or all of his archaeological data to support his pre-Clovis migration theory. Oh, so the guy who found it has a tainted past. The reported 1880s date of the discovery is important to those who believe that the stone is pre-Columbian. However, the Paleo-Hebrew script, which is closely related to the Phoenician script, was known by scholars by at least 1870, thus not precluding the possibility of a modern hoax. Oh! So the script used on the stone, modern scholars knew what they were doing by 1870. So if he found it in the 1880s, there was plenty enough time for a modern scholar to go in and fabricate a hoax and then just have a guy find it. That's why I say it's always important to pay attention to the chronological detail. I have no opinion on the authenticity of this stone. I can't tell if it's real or fake. But it's an interesting fake nonetheless, if it is fake. If it's authentic, what are we talking about? America is Egypt. Because of the stone's weight over 80 tons, it was never moved to a museum or laboratory for study and safekeeping. Many visitors have cleaned the stone inscriptions over the years, likely destroying any possibility for scientific analysis of the inscription's patina. Nevertheless, comparing it to a modern inscription nearby, geologist George E. Morehouse, a colleague of Barry Fell estimated that the inscription could be between 500 and 2,000 years old, and explaining its freshness and lack of patina as being due to frequent scrubbing to make it more visible. In April 06, the first line of the unprotected inscription was obliterated by vandals. I wonder who actually vandalized this stone and what was their reasoning behind the vandalization. Did somebody just want to taint the legitimacy of the rock? Why vandalize it? Just wonder why. Visitors to the site are required to purchase a $35 recreational access permit from the New Mexico State Land Office. They gonna get that money. It's an amusement park. Just like Egypt, just an amusement park. They created it. Took less time than the pyramids, obviously. Archaeolinguist Cyrus Gordon has proposed that the Los Lunas Decalogue stone is a Samaritan mezuzah. The familiar Jewish mezuzah is a tiny scroll placed in a small container mounted by the entrance to a house. The ancient Samaritan mezuzah, on the other hand, was commonly a large slab placed by the gateway to a property or synagogue, and bearing an abridged version of the Decalogue. On historical and epigraphic grounds, Gordon regards the Byzantine period as the most likely for the inscription. The Samaritan alphabet is a direct descendant of the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet. One argument against the stone's antiquity is its apparent use of modern Hebrew, or otherwise atypical punctuation. Though amateur apographer Barry Fell argued that the punctuation is consistent with antiquity. He's an amateur apographer, by the way. Other researchers dismissed the inscription based on the numerous stylistic and grammatical errors that appear in the inscription. You see what they do? They bust it for grammar all the time. Well, grammatically it's wrong. As if they had the guide to ancient syntax. I've busted the Associated Press and the New York Times on grammar. Does that mean when somebody pulls the newspaper article 1,000 years from now, it's a fake story? These guys were professors of ancient grammar. Languages the world has barely known for the last 100 years. All of a sudden, these people are experts. Other researchers dismiss the inscription based on the numerous stylistics and grammatical errors that appear in the inscription. And again, I'm not caping for the legitimacy of this rock. I have no opinion on its authenticity. My opinions mostly stem around these asshole archaeologists who claim they know everything about ancient language. According to archaeologist Ken Fetter, the stone is almost certainly a fake. He points out that the flat face of the stone shows a very sharp, crisp inscription. His main concern, however, is the lack of any archaeological context. There's no context for it. There's no context. How did it get here? Who knew how to speak this language? He argues that to get to the location of the stone would have required whoever inscribed it to have stopped along the way, encamped, eaten food, broken things, disposed of trash, performed rituals, and so on. And those actions should have left a trail of physical archaeological evidence across the greater American Southwest, discovery of which would undeniably prove the existence of foreigners in New Mexico in antiquity with a demonstrably ancient Hebrew material culture, and states that there are no pre-Columbian ancient Hebrew settlements, no settlements containing the everyday detritus of a band of ancient Hebrews, nothing that even a cursory knowledge of how the archaeological record forms would demand there would be. From an archaeological standpoint, that's plainly impossible. End quote, Kenneth Fetter. There's no context for it. How did they get here? There's no Hebrews here. There's no Egyptians. There's none of that old world fuckery. This is America, boy. The land of the savages. The land of the savages without culture. British archaeologist Keith Fitzpatrick Matthews has concluded that, viewed dispassionately, the Los Lunas inscription is a clear but well-constructed forgery for its day. Despite the claims of high antiquity, there are features of the text, such as mixing of letter forms between two separate alphabets, that are much more likely to derive from the work of a modern forger than from an ancient Hebrew or Samaritan scribe. Other speculative origin myths include the idea that members of a passing U.S. Army battalion made up of primarily Mormon soldiers. Mormon soldiers. Those damn Mormons. I told you. Those damn Mormons. Edit again. We can't prove that it was fabricated but it was probably the Mormons. End quote, Charlatan's Web. This article is pretty blurry, so I can't read the words, but I can make out the title. Arizona man won't sell skeleton of his prehistoric giant. The reason why this article is important is because this man lived near Prescott, Arizona. And of course, Prescott, Arizona, that whole area around Prescott, Arizona, several giant burials have been found. One of those being Sycamore Creek. Ancient burying ground uncovered. Skeletons found indicate that race of giants once lived on the banks of Sycamore Creek. Sycamore Creek not being far from Prescott, Arizona, where all other giants were found. Also, we find that a race of giants lived near Sycamore Creek, Arizona. Quote, a prehistoric graveyard on Sycamore Creek, where the grade of the Verde Railroad passes through, has been uncovered by a crew of laborers under the direction of conductor C.W. Corbin in performing certain excavations to improve the roadway. Let me stop here and say this. The railroad industry is hiding a ton of secrets. In many cases, they were the first people to prospect these undiscovered areas. We can also say the people who built the roads. These groups were the first to excavate these areas. And in several cases on record, they've come across giants. There has thus been revealed a very interesting situation that prevailed at some time or another in the physical makeup of a race, as is reflected in the massive remains that have been recovered and which are indisputable of a giant type of humanity that is bewildering to those of this generation. The skull of a human is in possession of Mr. Corbin, together with a portion of the frame that would indicate one who in life must have attained the height of at least 8 feet. Giant remains also found in Kern County, California, which these people say the giant was 12 feet tall. These are not all the giants found in the world. This area just happens to be the place in the world with the highest concentration of giants.
Walk with me to New York, rise on. Come share the love you had. See visions of your love come true. No love is waiting there just for you.
As far as the location of Mount Sinai goes, it's much harder to pinpoint. Presumably, it is a desert mountain somewhere in the vicinity of the former Red Sea, but also not far from the 12 fountains and 70 palms of Elim. As far as the bitter waters of Marah, I would put near the Mexicali area, in an area with brackish water, resembling the presumed salty or bitter waters of Marah mentioned in Exodus chapter 15 as the location they arrived before Elim. A lake like Laguna Salada fits this description pretty well in terms of its characteristics. Even the etymology of its name fits almost perfectly, salty lagoon, and the wood used to filter the salt or bitterness out of the water in the book of Exodus could have very well been a mangrove branch. Mangrove trees are known to desalinate water by over 90%. And it just so happens that there are mangroves all over this region, especially along the coast of the Gulf of California. According to estimates of the biblical itinerary, there should have been between 20 and 25 days travel between Elim and Mount Sinai. The question would be, how many miles per day could 2 million people walk? I would say a safe estimate would be somewhere between 8 and 15 miles a day. Overall, that would be between 150 and 225 miles. This would also account for Sabbath rest days. With all this being said, Mount Sinai should be within a 225-mile radius in the direction of nearby adjacent deserts from the location of Elim. Putting Elim somewhere in the Palm Springs, Palm Desert, or San Bernardino area, an area with more springs in just that location than the entirety of Egypt, Mount Sinai should be within a radius of 225 miles in the direction of nearby adjacent deserts, meaning that Mount Sinai most likely is in or around the Mojave Desert. Although I'm not exactly sure which mountain it could be, I am certain it is in this area. And I am even more certain that not only is America Egypt, America is the ancient Holy Land.
Before that, that's what I meant. Oh, wow. Hey, much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Once again, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you guys taking the time to do that out of your day, always. Today, we're going to be reading from this article right here. And it's regarding, well, something that we kind of talk about in this community, how they try to Africanize a lot of the, ancient people of America just because they were so-called black or because somebody wrote that they found so-called Negro or dark complexion people here, or because the stone sculptures, the pottery, terracotta look like so-called Negroes, so they try to Africanize that. One of those persons, or a person that has done that and became famous for that, he made a lot of money selling books off of that, was a guy called Ivan van Sertima. You guys might know him. I know a lot of you guys do. He wrote the book They Came Before Columbus, and literally he just Africanized all the so-called black people that were in ancient America, the copper-colored tribes of America. He did that with the books he wrote about Europe and many other parts of the world. But we're going to focus on what they're saying about here in the Americas, specifically from these other anthropologists, you know, who studied Mesoamerican history. Now, we do have to dodge the hijack a lot, both on Ivan Van Sertima's opinions, Afrocentricity, and on the people who are going to be talking about him and trying to debunk him, because, they try to like say, well, there wasn't any blacks here. He's mistaken. Just because there wasn't Africans here, that doesn't mean that there wasn't so-called black folks here or people that you would consider Negro people. America had its own people that you would consider Negro or so-called black. So we do have to dodge both sides of the argument. So I'll make side comments on that, and I'll go ahead and correct that. And again, we have all the videos, all the research we've done before to show that there was so-called black folks here, or black people, black Indians, or Negroid Indians here in the Americas since ancient times, since creation, original to this land, not from any other place in the world. But they wasn't Africans. So we're going to agree with the article on that. All right. We're going to be reading from Current Anthropology, Volume 38, number 3, from June 1997. So that's an academic journal, Current Anthropology. And the article is called Robin Native American Cultures, or Robin American Indian Cultures, Van Sertima's Afrocentricity and the Olmecs, by Gabriel Gasly Vieira, Bernard Ortiz de Montellano, and Warren Barber. Now, before we begin, though, just in case you don't know who Ivan Van Sertima is, and I know maybe some of you don't, and honestly, I hadn't looked into who he really was. I just knew about the books he had written. I know he was full of a lot of Afrocentric hijack, so I didn't really care to look into him. But I think this is important, just to know a little background on him. His full name is Ivan Gladstone Van Sertima, born in 1935. He passed away in 2009. He was a Guyanese-born British associate professor of Africana Studies at Rutgers University in the United States. Again, when they say in Guyanese, they're not talking about Guyana in Africa or Guinea. They're talking about the Guianas in South America. He was born in South America, Guyana, right? They used to call it British Guiana. He was best known for his Olmec alternative origin speculations. Speculations, meaning that they came from Africa. A brand of pre-Columbian contact theory, a theory, which he proposed in his book, They Came Before Columbus, from 1976. While his Olmec theory has spread widely in the African American community, both lay and scholarly, right? It spread. He brainwashed a lot of people, and he created a lot of following with the Pan-Africans community, both lay and scholarly, from normal people, even the hijacks and the agents, the boulets. It was mostly ignored in Mesoamerican scholarship, though, and has been called Afrocentric pseudo-archaeology and pseudo-history, fake history, to the effect of robbing Native American cultures or American Indian cultures, robbing them from their history, trying to Africanize it, literally. Van Sertima was born in Kitty Village near Georgetown, in what was then the colony of British Guiana. He retained his British citizenship throughout his life. He was a British citizenship. Why did he never get no African? He completed primary and secondary school in Guyana He attended the School of Oriental and African Studies, right, at the University of London, right? You see where that's headquartered in London? Van Sertima completed his undergraduate studies in African languages and literature, at SOAS in 1969, where he graduated with honors. Okay. From 1957 to 1959, Van Sertima worked as press and broadcasting officer in the Guyana Information Services. During the 1960s, he worked for several years in Great Britain as a journalist, doing weekly broadcasts to the Caribbean and Africa. Van Sertima married Maria Nagy in 1964. They adopted two sons, Larry and Michael. Now, starts talking about his published work. And again, that's all they talk about him, when they talk about he was from here. They don't really mention his parents or anything like that. I do just want to show you something real quick. I did try to do his tree. Of course, I didn't find much. It's not really easy. I just want to, again, emphasize Ivan. This is what he looked like, right? He was a light complexion person, a light so-called Negro, right? A lot of his family members are very light, and they carry these Dutch, German, English names, right? Not African names, So remember, Van Sertima, probably Dutch. Van means from Sertima, all right? And this is what he looks like, okay? As you saw in Wikipedia as well. You can see how light he was at his later age and his older years. He was a little darker in some younger years. He got little tans here and there, probably from Guyana. But in general, if he doesn't go in the sun, he's going to get really light skin and reddish, huh? Going up his line, these are his parents, Frank Obermuller Van Sertima. This is the picture of his dad, and I'm not making this up, guys. That's his dad right there, looking almost like it could be, or somebody that can pass for white, right? Or even a white man. Might be mixed, He probably is mixed. We got a little picture of his mom. All right, but this is what I'm trying to explain. These are the people trying to Africanize you, when I don't even think they have any African in them, right? No African in them. I don't think so, right? That was his mom, Clara Idona Smith. I wasn't able to find anything on her, where she was born, most likely in Guyana as well. This is his grandparents. Rosalie is the grandma. Obermuller. Don't think of, oh yeah, she's one of us. Yeah, well, all kinfolk ain't kinfolk. Her last name is Obermuller. I would say that's probably German or Swiss or Dutch, right? That's his mom. And his dad would be John Alexander Van Sertima. Okay, one interesting thing about what I found about his dad, I just want to show you guys here. It's in the hints. I wasn't able to accept it because it's an international hint from England. I don't have the international feature, right? But I just want to show you what it says here, right? As you guys can see, it says John Alexander Van Sertima in the England United Grand Lodge, England, Grand Lodge of England, Freemason membership registers. Freemason. His dad, or his grandfather, sorry, was a Freemason in England. Yeah, they were going back and forth from England to French Guiana. He does have a lot of English blood. All right. I don't have what degree he was or anything, large number. I wasn't able to accept it, but he was. This is him. This is his grandfather, Joseph Alexander Van Sertima. All right. Freemason. A Freemason, usually, that's a hereditary thing. You can pass down to kids. He probably got it from his dad, Alexander Van Sertima. Right. So maybe his dad was a Freemason as well. Maybe Ivan was a Freemason as well. I do want to show his uncle. This is his uncle, Sidney Jacob Van Sertima, a very prominent person in Guyana, right? He was appointed by the English monarch, by the English royal monarch, the people in charge as the main judge in Guyana. This is him right here. Wealthy, very prominent, what I would say, so-called Black Europeans. Might have some indigenous blood here and there, but I would say in general, these were mainly Black European heritage, right? Not African. As you guys can see, this is his family. A lot of them, again, very light complexioned. He was in the regiment or corps in England as well. As you guys see, military place, England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, United Kingdom. Medal Rolls Index, that's him right here. This is his obituary. It says first Negro judge in West Indies. This is his uncle. British Guiana lost one of its most distinguished colored sons on Sunday evening last when Sidney J. Van Sertima, British Guiana's youngest king counsel and one of the most brilliant scholars and lawyers in the West Indies, died after an illness of the 2 months. He was 42. Okay, so these are prominent families in Guyana. That's where Ivan Van Sertima is coming from. Again, that I wasn't able to get much more, but I did get some of the wives for some of his uncles. This is one of Sidney's wives, Audrey Batterman. Her parents, Alfred Batterman, Edith Batterman, and it keeps on going. Batterman. As you guys can see, these names, I just want you to pay attention. We're not talking about, and she's English. They're all English. I don't know what color they are, but I'm assuming they got with light complexion people. Another of his uncles got with Gladys Binen or Binen, right? These are her parents. Pretty interesting right here. George Binen, Abigail de Newark. All right, that's what they look like. Again, very light complexion, so-called Black folks. And you just see that's their parents or his parents, Biden. Now they got a little drawing here of a so-called white man, but that might be a whitewash image. Might not. Robert John Biden, Louisa Spencer, and then his wife's parents, Benjamin Newark, Amelia Spencer. So the Spencers are sisters. All right, I was able to determine that. His parents, Richard Newark. Newark, look at the last names, all from Guyana still. I remember who was settling these areas. Remember the history there with the so-called Dutch, Black Dutch, Sephardic Jews and all that. But again, I thought it was interesting what I found here on Ivan Van Sertima's tree. Where's all the Africans? What African, if any? And again, just look at what he looks like. These are the people, again, trying to make you African, try to Africanize everything, all right? Now, before we go read on that article, because again, we got to dodge a lot of hijack, right? I just did a video the other day showing you some of the stone pottery, the terracotta, how it was depicting different type of phenotypes, features, people, looks of ancient American, people that look so-called Semitic or so-called white based on the aquiline nose, not because they were so-called white, but just because the nose looks different, they try to say, oh, that's Semitic. Oh, that's white. Oh, he's white because he got a beard. Oh, Semitic because, but again, we're still showing that there was many different phenotypes here in the true old world, America. Just guys remember that while we're reading this. If you're new to my channel, please catch up. We've proven all this. They're not from Africa. We debunked the out of Africa theories. You're seeing it in reverse. America's the true old world. This is so-called Atlantis, right? Just remind you of what we just saw the other day in the video. This is from the Atlantic Journal and Friends of Knowledge, encyclopedic journal and review of universal science and knowledge, historical nature and medical arts and sciences, with numerous figures from editor C.F. Rafinsky, professor of historical natural sciences. This is from 1832. This is just a little excerpt I grabbed from that. And it says here, the Americans cannot have sprung from a single nation because independently of the languages, their features and complexions, listen, are as various as in Africa and Asia, just like in Africa and Asia, meaning this so-called Black folks here, right? Or Negroid, right? Looking people. We find in America white or light skin, right? Tawny, brown, yellow, olive, copper colored tribes, right? And even Black nations, as in Africa, just like in Africa. Not that they're from Africa, but just like what you would find in Africa. We also got dwarves or pygmy small people and giants, giant people, right? We found them all over the mountains, handsome and ugly features, flat noses, just like the Olmec statues, but the Olmecs also have potteries and mats with aquiline noses, thick and thin lips. Very different looks here in America, and it's hijack or pseudo or just opinions to say, oh, these people are from somewhere else just because they look different than what they want you to think Indians look like, guys. So that's very important before we begin reading this, okay? Remember that there was even so-called black nations as in Africa. That doesn't mean that they came from Africa. America's a true old world. We had all these different looks here, okay? We've proven it over and over in the last 8 years, okay? All right, so again, going back into the article, Current Anthropology Journal, volume 38, number 3 from June 1997, robbing Native American cultures or American Indian cultures, right? Robbing them, robbing their identity, adding some hijack. Van Sertima's Afrocentricity, Afrocentric opinions, Pan-African opinions, and the Olmecs. Again, by Gabriel Haslett Vieira, Bernard Ortiz de Montellano, and Warren Barber. And it says here, in 1976, Ivan Van Sertima proposed that the New World civilizations were strongly influenced by diffusion from Africa. That's the hijack, you see? And then he's a diffusionist, right? This is what I was saying about yesterday's video, how they just try to make everybody come from somewhere else, but never want to give credit to America having its own people, its own civilizations, natural, autochthonous to America. The first and most important contact, he argued, was between Nubians and Olmecs in 700 BC. He has no proof of that. This is what I'm trying to tell you guys. If you read his book, he has no sources or proof for any of that. And it was followed by other contacts from Mali in AD 1300. No proof of that either. That's a conjecture. He's talking about the Mansa Musa travels, supposedly to America, which we're going to do a video about. I'm going to show you how it's just a theory. They don't know where he went. They just know he got lost in the Atlantic. They don't know if he even made it here. And if he did make it here, where is he, right? And that's a conjecture to say, oh, because of him, now the Olmecs are black. That's all hijacked. This theory has spread widely in the African American community, both lay and scholarly, but it has never been evaluated at length by Mesoamericanists. This article shows the proposal to be devoid of any foundation, all right? There's no foundation for this stuff. First, no genuine African artifact has ever been found in a controlled archaeological excavation in the New World. You know, what does that mean? What is an African artifact, right? The presence of African origin plants, such as the bottle gourd, Lagenaria ciceraria, or of African genes and New World cotton, right, shows that there was contact between the old world and the new, but this contact occurred too long ago to have involved any human agency, and is irrelevant to Egyptian Olmec contact. You know, the Egyptians are all the way in East Africa, right? And again, what do we already know about ancient Egypt, guys? That was right here. Ancient Egypt was right here, so that automatically gets killed. That whole notion, oh, Egyptians came. Well, duh, Egypt was here. Ancient Egypt was here. So yeah, people were traveling all over the Americas back and forth. Yeah, but that doesn't mean they were from Africa. You guys understand? The colossal Olmec heads, which resemble a stereotypical Negroid, were carved hundreds of years before the arrival of the presumed models. All right? Those things are older than what he's saying. Oh, they came in 1300. Oh, they came in 700 BC. Well, sorry, those are older. It doesn't fit your proposed models timeline. All right? Stereotypical Negroid, though, at least they're admitting it does look Negroid. Additionally, Nubians who come from a desert environment and have long, high noses do not resemble their supposed portraits. All right? So, what does a lot of the Middle Eastern people, Arabian people look like? They have alkaline noses. They're not all looking like flat noses. And I know a lot of people will say, well, that's because those are the invaders. The other people look different. Well, that's, you know, that's a whole lot of conjecture going into it. And okay, still, it doesn't mean where's the proof that those people, if they look like the Olmec, came over here from Africa, right? Claims for the diffusion of pyramid building and mummification are also fallacious, all right? So Ben Sertima says, oh, because there's pyramids in America, it had to have been Africans. It had to have been Africans who built them. Oh, wait, we found mummies in America. Oh, it had to have been Egyptians or Africans. Dodge the hijack, right? Dodge the hijack so much. You guys know where the oldest mummies are in the world, right?
Revolutionary salute to our family, LRP, for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Appreciate the love, family. Salute.
Right? We're talking about the Chinchorro mummies of Chile. They even found some in a cave, I believe in the Southwest, in Arizona, Nevada, a spirit cave, I believe. I think that's going really old as well, and some in Florida are really old. But in general, officially, we're talking about at least 9,000 years old when we're talking about the Chinchorro mummies of Chile and Peru. Right? Really old, older than the so-called Egyptian ones, right? In his 1976 book, They Came Before Columbus, Ivan van Sertima argued that Negroid Africans had come to the Americas at various times before the European discovery and had either inspired or influenced the development of the first civilizations to emerge on these continents. Like other pseudoscientific writings that had been published up until that time, the book was either completely ignored or generally dismissed by anthropologists, historians, and other academic professionals. All right, they're like, that's pseudo, man. Except for a brief reference by Glenn Daniel in 1977, it was never reviewed in any of the professional journals. You guys hear that? Daniel, who also reviewed Barry Fell's America BC, dismissed it. But neither he nor any other academic professional ever developed a detailed or cogent response to the main thrust of Van Sertima's ideas. As Daniel himself predicted, the book became a profitable venture for both Van Sertima and his publisher. They made mad money, guys. These are agents making money of trying to Africanize you. All right? They made a lot of money, a very profitable venture for him and his publishers. Readers were apparently attracted by the real mysteries that surrounded the subject, the origins and evolution of civilization in the Americas. At the same time, the book also received the attention and enthusiastic support of a small but increasingly influential group of cultural nationalists in the African American community. All right? Cultural nationalists, Pan Africans. By the late 1980s, Van Sertima's ideas were beginning heartily endorsed by Molefi Asante. Look, you're Pan Africans, right? One of the gurus of the afrocentric movement. That's the hijack with these people, these plants, right? Asante and Matsun. This movement in all its complexity emerged from the cultural nationalism of the 1960s and 1970s, which clearly articulated theories of human development that incorporated Van Sertima's ideas on the origins of civilization in the Americas, right? Again, come on, we had our own people here. I just want to emphasize something. 600 out of 640 food crops in Africa originated in America. So when we're talking about civilization, usually that starts from agriculture. And that was here in the Americas, guys. The oldest agriculture, the most foods available in the world that are spread out to the world today. I mean, we feed the world, man. According to the Afrocentrists, all of the world's early civilizations, including those of ancient Egypt, ancient Mesopotamia, India, China, Europe, and the Americas, were created or inspired by racially black peoples. Now, see, right here, this is why I'm saying we got to dodge the hijacks on both sides. And I think we can agree with that. Melanated people did actually inspire these civilizations, but it doesn't mean they were coming out of Africa. So that's why we got two hijacks trying to debate each other. Oh, it wasn't black people. No such thing as black. That's a crayon color. We're talking about people of color. Yeah, they were all over the world. And a lot of those people, they're saying in China and Europe, might have come out of the true old world. Ancient America, India, who is the ancient Nagas? Huh? The Nagas, Naga, came out of the Maya civilization or the ancient Americans, guys. And a lot of people in Europe as well and Asia. Asia, this is Eastern, the farthest east. This is Asia. In articulating their claims, the Afrocentrists relied very heavily on the ideas of Cheikh Anta Diop, all right, who we've seen, he was all Sufism, brought up. He had a different name before he became Diop. Like, most likely he goes back to Black French heritage, not just the African, So he's one of also the big uh, pushers of Pan-Africanism, Afrocentricity in the world. A lot of the Pan-Africans, go read Chicanta Diab's research. You don't know anything, Kurima. I'm like, these people are biased. And I believe the high degree Masons and trying to, again, influence you to lie for somebody. They're working for somebody, lie to try to Africanize everything, right? So, Chiap Antadiop, Chancellor Williams, that's another one, John G. Jackson, George James, and others. These writers reformulated the standard 19th and early 20th century European and North American racial concepts in such a way that the Afrocentrists could promote a hegemonic black model of human development. All right. So this is the thing. They turned all these people into Africans, but it doesn't mean it wasn't people of color, right? That started a lot of the civilizations. You know, the whole world was melanated. Remember what Benjamin Franklin said in the 1750s, the whole world was melanated. In his 1974 book, The African Origins of Civilization, Myth or Reality, right? That's Diop's book, right? Again, Afrocentric, out of Africa theories. Diop accepted the standard tripartite division of the human species into Caucasoid, Negroid, and Mongoloid. All right. Again, and that was started by Germans. That's a hijack. That way of dividing people by that type of description. That's a hijack, guys. We're gonna break this down even more as we keep going and learning, right? Trying to make you understand something too. If you're listening, please don't be in your feelings. Try to understand what I'm saying. I mean, we got 8 years to back us up of research, not just what I'm reading today, not what I'm just saying today. Please catch up if you're new. But that's a very hijacked way of looking at people. Caucasoid, Negroid, and Mongoloid, because the original Caucasians were so-called black too, or Negroid. And Mongoloids, well, the Mongols, original Mongols, or Russian hordes, Genghis Khan was a black man. Genghis Khan was a black man. Let me just go ahead and show you guys something real quick. All right, so this image right here is from an old uh, Encyclopedia Britannica from the 1800s. This Britannica, this volume has been hidden. It has been revised. The pictures have changed. They got this from an Encyclopedia Britannica. All right. As you guys can see, they don't no longer have this available. It's not even scanned. And if it is, you got to go through hundreds of volumes from these years of this Britannica. And I can't, it's hard to find the original. But many people know it. Many people had already scanned it from physically going into the book and taking pictures of it and scanned it. And as you guys can see, they got Caucasian looking like this. What do you mean Caucasoid? That looks like a so-called black man, right? Then they got Mongolian over here, you see? With the Mongolian also looking swarthy, dark complexion, like a so-called Negroid, right? And of course, they put European white on this one. They were trying to put themselves into history. But we know what the original Europeans also are described like, very swarthy. You know, we've shown the videos, we've shown the anthropology, the primary sources, guys. All right, I'm not just trying to blackwash here. I know a lot of people still, even like recently, I'm talking about this week, I get comments even from black folks telling me to stop trying to blackwash history. Black folks telling me that, right? All right, this is again, it says here, the Colchians, Ethiopians, and Egyptians have thick lips, broad nose, woolly hair, and they are burnt of skin. Herodotus. Herodotus. All right. And here's an image of the African, you see, and the Caucasian. Original Caucasians were melanated, so-called Negro too. I believe the Khoisans are coming out of this stock of so-called Caucasians. The Khoisan people of Africa, one of the oldest Africans, their history starts out with them coming into Africa from the Mediterranean, not coming out of Africa. Their history literally starts right there. So they try to theorize and tell us that, well, maybe they came out of Africa before that. Of course, all black people come out of Africa. That's a theory, out of Africa theory. No, you can't do that. They start them out coming into Africa. The Khoisan people, if you guys don't know that, look into it. Got future videos on all this. They come into Africa from the Mediterranean. I believe a lot of them are related to these original Caucasian, right? Now, also, they were talking about Mongoloid, right? We just saw Mongolian right here to the right. Mongolian, right? Right? These are drawings or a painting of Genghis Khan. This is Genghis Khan in the top here. They kind of whitewash everybody else, but it says here Prince Michael of Chernigov, a Russian prince, was passed between fires in accordance with ancient Turco-Mongol tradition. Batu Khan, supposed to be the grandson or nephew of Genghis Khan, so he would be melanated as well. Batu Khan, Vatican, Batu Khan. Yeah, the Golden Horde is the Vatican. Stabbed him to death for his refusal to do obeisance to Genghis Khan's shrine in the pagan ritual. Note that Genghis Khan is depicted as a black man. You guys note that? Genghis Khan is depicted as a black man. Genghis Khan shrine. You see that? I got another image, right? This right here, we got Temujin. His real name Temujin or Georgi Danilovich. We got a whole future videos on this. Who's the real Genghis Khan? That's the title, aka Genghis Khan, King of the Tartars, Tartary. You guys see? So-called black man. Remember, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. So I'm not trying to say these are your people too. Just stop trying to generalize and add yourself to every so-called black person in the world. It's all different peoples. That's why we're saying, we're trying to dodge the hijack too in this article when they're saying, oh, it wasn't started by black civilizations. Just because Afrocentric people try to make them African, that doesn't mean we can't really understand the truth that it was melanated people all around the world in ancient times. In China, in Japan, all over, in India, Hindustan. Come on now. This is what I'm just trying to explain to you. Open your eyes, realize, right? This is Genghis Khan, what most likely he looked like. Genghis Khan, so-called Mongoloid, huh? What does Mongoloid really look like? So that's why when we're going back to the article and seeing those hijacks, right? Going back to the articles, right? That Diop accepted the standard tripartite division of the human species into Caucasoid, Negroid, and Mongoloid. Again, that's hijack, guys. I just showed you one reason why that's not a good way to identify people. You gotta get off that too. And that was pushed by a lot of German anthropologists eventually, craniology, the division of races, all that. That's not nationality, color or phenotypes, and subdivided the black race into persons with predominantly straight or wavy hair. The black race into what? Predominantly straight or wavy hair, such as the Dravidians of India, and persons with predominantly curly or tightly coiled hair, such as the Igbo of Nigeria. So that's Diop, what he did, all right? In an attempt to incorporate as many groups as possible into the Negro category, Diop also accepted the racist Western definition of blackness as any degree of black or African ancestry. So anybody that was known to be so-called black or people of color in the world, then Diop and all these historians, these Afrocentric, Ivan Van Sertima, all these people started making them Africans. Even J.A. Rogers did that in his books. He has a lot of good info, J.A. Rogers, but he's also one of these people that, just because he's finding so-called black people in Europe, he made them African, all right? Of course, once these race concepts were reformulated, they could be applied to reinterpreted his history of civilization and human development with predictable results. According to the ancient Egyptians, also defined as black, regardless of their skin color and their other physical characteristics. So there's even a mural, a hieroglyphic mural in Egypt where it depicts them looking all different, the different types of Egyptians. There was black, there was what they call yellow with beard, and many other copper colored, right? So again, where was ancient Egypt? I was in America. So, that cancels out anyways. But so even Egyptians were considered only so-called black or from Africa. From its alleged African homeland, alleged civilization was presumably bequeathed to other black peoples throughout the world through either direct contact or indirect diffusion. These alleged black recipients included the ancient Sumerians of Mesopotamia. That's the hijack. What Sumerians? There is no nation called Sumerians. All these Sumerian tablets are actually Assyrian script. It's actually Assyrian writing. And the real Cimmerian, Cimmerians, Cimmerians, coming out of the Arctic areas of the world, the dark Arctic areas of the world into Europe, not out of so-called Africa. All right. So they're trying to say, oh, they made them black. Well, they did have Cimmerians, did have melanated people too. Japheth's people, a lot of them were melanated, yes, not just so-called white. The Sabians of South Arabia, the Elamites of southwestern Iran, the Dravidians of India, the Shang of China, and the Minoans of ancient Crete, among others. Yes, and I'm gonna tell you, yeah, these people did have, people of color in their nations, so-called black people. Yes, originally probably they were black. That doesn't mean they came out of Africa, guys. In the case of the Americas, a more complicated scenario had to be advanced in order to account for the relative isolation of these continents and the geographical obstacles posed by the Atlantic and the Pacific. This scenario, developed most completely by Van Sertima, was incorporated into the emergent afrocentric view by the late 1980s. You guys see the time frame where this is all starting to happen. They're starting to turn everybody into Africans just recently, all over the world, not just in the Americas, but especially in the Americas. You hear this? Just like the whole African American thing, right? In the 80, 89, 90s, with the Reverend Jesse Jackson, right? Trying to, hey, let's use African American. Let's start calling ourselves African American. Starts to hijack, right? This is all happening recently. Your ancestors never called themselves that. And, they don't know anything about no Africans. Ask your grandma. Ask your great-grandparents. According to Van Sertima's hypothesis, the Nubian rulers of ancient Egypt, right, from those time periods, that's the hijack on the chronology, organized an expedition with the help of the Phoenicians to obtain various commodities, including iron from the sources of the Atlantic coast of North Africa, Europe, and the British Isles during the late 8th or early 7th century BC. And again, that's the hijack with the whole Phoenician thing. Phoenicians are seafarers, not a specific nation. It included many different types of people that were seafaring, that were eventually called Phoenicians. And again, shout out to the archivist. He makes a lot of sense when he's letting you know it was more like a secret society of seafarers. They had the knowledge of the world and of navigation. That knowledge was only spread to a certain group of people. They were the so-called Phoenicians. But remember, so-called Phoenicians came out of the true Holy Land, Canaan. And I know a lot of you are going to get mad because, oh, he tried to put everything in America. This is the true Holy Land. These are the biblical lands. Shout out to UBTV, 432, the Drop Radio. This is the true terrestrial paradise, the oldest land and coming out of the primordial waters, the true old world, America. That's where so-called Phoenicians came out of. So that whole theory that they used Phoenicians, Africans used Phoenicians to come, they just see in history all misinterpreted based on a biased Afrocentric view. Yeah, they did go to North Africa. Yeah, they did go to Europe. Yes, they did went to the British Isles, of course, but they came out of America, the Phoenicians, so-called seafaring people. This expedition allegedly sailed from the Nile Delta. Where's the real Nile? The Mississippi or the Levant across the Mediterranean? Allegedly, right? Allegedly, they never proved that, through the Pillars of Hercules and down the Atlantic coast of North Africa, where it was caught in some current or storm that sent it across the Atlantic to the Americas. So then he tried to say, oh, it was by mistake that the Phoenicians came here, or these Africans, huh? It was by mistake, huh? They got lost, they got caught in a storm. If anybody was to cross the Atlantic first, what do we already know, right? This is from an actual historian of navigation. He literally said that if anybody was to cross the Atlantic first, it would have been ancient Americans, all right? Ancient Americans. So Van Sertima was saying, yeah, they got lost, they got caught in the storm, they were following the prevailing wind and ocean currents. Now remember, the ocean currents are stronger going that way. The Gulf Stream is one of the most powerful ocean, and it brings you that way. We got more favorable winds going that way than the opposite. It's 4 times harder to come the other way, guys. And we've gone over this information and research already. So that's a conjecture. That's a theory. That theory doesn't really work because we know that the winds are more favorable. We know the currents, the ocean currents are more stronger going that way. So he's saying the expedition allegedly sailed or drifted westward from some unspecified location, right? No location in the Eastern Caribbean or the Bahamas to the Gulf Coast of Mexico, where it came into contact with the receptive but inferior Olmecs. So see what I'm saying? He's saying they met the Olmecs, but I thought they were the Olmecs. So he even writes this, guys. He writes this, he contradicts himself, saying they are the Olmecs, but then you're saying that these Africans met the Olmecs when they were there, right? According to the scenario at this point, the Olmecs presumably accepted the leaders of the Nubian Egyptian expedition as their rulers. Black warrior dynasties, right? This is what Ben Sertima is writing in his book, guys. This is what Pan-Africans love to read and like, oh yeah, we came and we took over. They made us the rulers. Why would people that have been here thousands of years, got these amazing civilizations, pyramids, all that advanced life? Oh yeah, you guys get to be the rulers now. We don't know who you guys are, but you're the rulers, right? This is what he writes in his book. It's crazy. And these individuals in turn created, inspired, or influenced the creation of the Olmec civilization. So how are you meeting Olmecs and then creating it at the same time? And now remember, that word Olmec, nobody ever used that word to call themselves back in those times. They didn't call themselves the Olmec. I got a video, you guys, I got a video. It's called The Out of Olmec Theory. Check out those 3 parts. I didn't even finish reading that book, but go check it out. There's more to the Olmec, please. Just please go check that out. Let's not be biased ourselves with it, you know. But yes, they had the stone heads, a lot of Negroid depictions in their pottery and their masks and their stone heads and their stone. But not just that, they had a lot of other different looking people. I believe the Olmec civilization was like a melting pot of different nations. They have like a mega metropolis. Like New York has different people from all over the world, right? Anyways, he's trying to say that these African people came and started or influenced the Olmec civilization, which in turn influenced Monte Alban, Teotihuacan, and the classic Maya. See, he just took all credit. He gave it all to Africans. He took it away from ancient Americans and all the other Mesoamerican civilizations that followed, right? This is what he did. This is what these people did, Africanized everything. In Van Sertima's scenario, the Nubians became the models for the colossal stone heads, which the Olmecs produced in the years that followed the alleged contact. And he has no proof of that. They're only basing that off the features. Just because you found people that look like Negro people or so-called black people, he said, oh, they had to have been Africans. That's it, period. That's it. I'm right. So Van Sertima also writes, they also presided over a mixed crew of voyagers that included Egyptians, Phoenicians, and several women. All right. Again, we had all these whatever phenotypes he's talking about. And remember, ancient Egypt was here. Phoenicians came out of here. All that gets canceled out. We've already proven this. The Nubians subsequently provided the impetus for the building of pyramids and ceremonial centers and introduced a number of technological innovations and practices. Mummification, he's saying, this is what Ivan, he's just going over what Ivan Ben Sertima said in his book. So they're saying, oh, they came and brought pyramid building technology here. No, we had the first pyramid, the oldest pyramids in America, in the world, Caral Supe in Peru, guys. Caral Supe, we've shown the research, we've shown the documentary. Come on now, right? And then mummification, again, the oldest mummies in the world in the Americas, not in Africa. So this makes no sense. This is what I'm saying. Hijack on top of hijack. You know, metallurgy. No, we had metallurgy here. The symbolic use of purple murex dye, weaving. We had all this stuff here, guys. Come on. Which presumably influenced Mesoamerican religion, mythology, customs, and even the calendar. Come on, now the oldest calendars from the Olmec and Maya. Come on, guys. This is an enormous number of claims by Mr. Ivan Van Sertima, and several large volumes would be needed to deal with all of them. In this essay, we will discuss the evidence that would be most significant if it were true. We will deal elsewhere with Van Sertima's historical methodology, his use of sources, and his writings on iconography and linguistics. De Montellano, Hasleviera, and Barbo. Van Sertima occasionally says that the Olmecs were not pure Africans. Like even in his book, he says they weren't pure Africans, or that the African voyagers only influenced and were not the main catalyst for the rise of civilization in the Americas. Look, he contradicts himself in his own book. But these disclaimers are merely pro forma. And he had to say that because he knew he couldn't prove that, right? And also because there's other phenotypes with the Olmecs. That's what I'm trying to explain to you. Van Sertima knew that. He couldn't say, well, this guy that looks like an Asian, this Asian mask. Just go ahead and Google it right now, guys. I've shown it in my videos. Google Olmec pottery, Olmec mask. You'll see different phenotypes. He couldn't take credit for everything. So he's like, oh, they're not fully Africans. Continues, says the cumulative total of his claims amounts to a decisive influence on most aspects of the Olmec culture: religion, language, pyramids, customs, weaving, metalworking, dyeing, etc. If the Nubians were not godlike or superior, why would the Olmecs on short acquaintance put forth the Herculean efforts required to transport and carve their likeness in basalt, right? If they weren't godlike, then why would they do that? If the Nubians were not superior, why would most of Van Sertima's followers attribute the sudden rise of the Olmecs to Egypto-Nubian influences? Come on now. That's a good question. This is what I was saying earlier. Why would they do that? Why would they just, oh, you guys get to rule us now? Van Sertima also claimed that Black Africans made other journeys to the Americas at various times after the 7th century BC. The most important of these alleged voyages was that of the Abu Bakr II, the Mandingo emperor of Mali in AD 1311. And guys, again, he's going to talk about it right now. We might have more videos on this. I'm going to show you the actual sources. He's going to mention the actual sources. There's only one source for this. And they never said he went to the Americas. Never in the source did he say they went. This is conjecture. So this is what he used in conjecture to say, oh, they came to the Americas, these people, in 1311 from Mali. According to Van Sertima, Abu Bakr embarked from some unspecified location, he doesn't know where, on the western coast of his dominions, Senegambia, most likely, right? That's what they say in the theory, with a large fleet of ships, and sailed across the Atlantic to the Gulf Coast of Mexico, where his expedition came into contact with the peoples of the Vera Cruz region, the Valley of Mexico, and the Valley of Oaxaca. These peoples were profoundly influenced by Abu Bakr and his Mandingo agents in the areas of technology, religion, and the arts in the period after contact was established. In the years since the publication of They Came Before Columbus, Van Sertima has revised his hypothesis, listen, only slightly and with great reluctance. For example, in the early 1980s, he pushed back the date for the earliest possible contact between the Olmecs and the Egypto-Nubians to the early 10th century BC. Again, that all cancels out. If he's calling them Egyptians when ancient Egypt was here, that automatically is pseudo. Automatically, he's saying Nubians, not even West Africans. He's saying Nubians came over here from East Africa, right? When Egypt was right here. Shout out again to UBTB. He has so many videos proving that America is Egypt. Go check out those videos, guys. I really enjoy them. I think they're very informative. They make a lot of sense. We've already proven corn is from here. We know ancient Egypt, Little Egypt, North America. We know all that was right here. Come on now. So that cancels out what he's saying about Egypto-Nubians coming in earlier whenever he's saying and influencing. And he says that in an attempt to account for the revised dates established for the origins of Olmec civilization at that time. So because they had realized that the so-called Olmec civilization, as people were starting to study them, was going even further back in time, his book that he had written in the 70s wasn't adding with the real timelines of what they're finding in Mexico. So he had to kind of push that back a little bit. Oh, no, no. Oh, I meant they came a little. I meant that these Egyptians came before that. That's what I meant. So he revised his books, newer editions. Literally, you can go check them out. He changed the time. The revised chronology was also used by Van Sertima to claim that the Nubians had had a strong influence over the Egyptians from the early 11th to the middle of the 7th century BC. More recently, he has grudgingly accepted the Olmec chronology by emphasizing the alleged importance of the Black Egyptian and Pharaonic society, and by claiming that the Black African played a dominant role in the old world at either end of the dating equation, be it 1200 BC or 700 BC. So, he's trying to say, you got to dodge the hijack because he's trying to Africanize all the other old world cultures, which is true. They didn't all come out of Africa or from Africa at all, but they were melanated people, these original people in the old so-called old world, the other side of the world. This is the old world over here. We should call the new world that side over there. Van Sertima has nurtured a coterie of enthusiastic supporters among the Afrocentrists and the cultural nationalists in general. So this is music to their ears, all these Pan-Africans, all these Afrocentric people. This is music to their ears. Of course they love his book. Of course, oh, he's such a great researcher. He's a master teacher, Ivan Van Sertima. You saw what he looked like, right? Van Sertima is not an African last name, right? I bet you he has no African in him. This is the people trying to Africanize you. And this is the people Pan-Africans run with. All right, so he has literally brainwashed them, and it's music to their ears because that's what they believe. That's what they want to be true, right? These Afrocentric and the cultural nationalists in general. These individuals are inclined to promote his concepts as historical truth. Like I was just saying, Pan-Africans will run with that with no proof just because a Olmec looks Negroid, the statue. They're saying it's African. Oh, he's right. He's right. You're wrong, Cootie Mel. He's right. You don't know anything. They have also launched impassioned attacks against the academic establishment for not supporting Van Sertima's and other questionable theories, right? And then they go at people like us who do real research. The recent publication of one of his essays by the Smithsonian Institution Press has conferred some academic respectability on his views, and he has been praised by St. Clair Drake and Manon Marable, two non-Afrocentric scholars with considerable reputations. His hypothesis has become almost an article of faith within the African American community. His guesses, his hypothesis, his theories ain't facts, they're music to the ears for many in the African American community, right? Mostly the Pan-Africans. It is taught across the country in African American and Africana study programs that use Ma'alana Taringa's Introduction to Black Studies, right? This is literally what they tell us in schools, right? And similar texts. It is taught in the large urban school districts that have adopted Afrocentric curricula, all right? The presumably Negroid Olmec heads have become staples of African American historical museums and exhibitions. The presumably Negroid Olmec heads have become staples of African American historical museums and exhibitions. Again, they are Negroid. So again, this article is going to try to say, well, they're not black just because these people also think that all black people came from Africa. When the people who write this also come with the out of Africa theory. So that's what they're saying. They're trying to debunk him just because of that, because they don't want him to be Negroid too, but they were, right? It's very clear. We can literally see that, all right? We can literally see that. It is therefore no wonder that students and colleges and universities across the country are mystified by the dismissive statements occasionally uttered by academic professionals when Van Sertima's ideas are discussed. African American students in particular have not been impressed by the abbreviated critiques that have been published thus far. They are also generally suspicious of the academic establishment with its record of neglect and distortion with regard to Africa and have called for a detailed response to Van Sertima's ideas. This article is an attempt to address the issues articulated by students and concerned educators with regard to the validity of Van Sertima's hypotheses and the failure of the academic establishment to confront them in a systematic way. It is important for anthropologists and archaeologists to deal with this question because of its prevalence and because it diminishes the real accomplishments of Native American cultures. As Robert Scherer and Wendy Ashmore put it, archaeology has a responsibility to prevent pseudo archaeologists from robbing humanity. All right, these Afrocentric people, Pan African, robbing humanity of the real achievements of past cultures. This essay will examine Van Sertima's claims to determine whether they have any validity or foundation in the evidence that has been collected thus far by scholars in the humanities and the social and physical sciences. It is necessary to limit our discussion here to the most important claims and the most convincing types of evidence. Now remember, this article was written in 1997, so it's not that up to date. You know, we're in 2024, going into 2025. We've learned so much in just the last 10 years, right? We've learned so much, so there's still stuff missing. But again, when it comes to debunking Van Sertima and the Pan-Africans, it's a good article because it makes a lot of logical points that nobody ever talks about, that we always talk about in our channel. Authentic artifacts found in controlled archaeological excavations provide absolute proof of contact. However, no such artifact of African origin has ever been found in the New World, okay? Body bag for the illusion. Shout out to Con Drop, yo. All right, again, no such artifact of African origin has ever been found in here in the Americas. All right, so you're trying to say all these so-called Africans came, you got Mansa Musa with all these ships coming, but nothing has been found, right? The archaeological discovery of non-native plants can also provide good evidence of contact. Van Sertima's crucial claim deals with the influence of the alleged Nubian Egyptian visitors of the 25th dynasty on the Olmec culture. Again, that gets thrown out the window when we know ancient Egypt was here, guys. So that gets thrown out the window, but let's see what they're going to say, right? Because at this time and in this culture, a number of definitive Mesoamerican traits presumably appear. If Van Sertima and others are correct, Mesoamerican civilization owes a great debt to Egypt. Again, we might be agreeing with that, but ancient Egypt was here. Ancient Egypt was here. So you see that whole point Van Sertima and these Pan-Africans have, that gets debunked right away. Ancient Egypt was here. If the idea of Egyptian contact with the Olmecs is invalid, then other claims by Van Sertima and his colleagues are greatly weakened. Just like what I was just saying. If he's using that it was Egyptian Nubians that came here, and we know ancient Egypt was here, then everything else he has to say can't be taken serious, guys. This is what he's saying. All that stuff becomes greatly weakened. All his hypotheses, all his theories. For example, the proposed AD 1311 expedition from Mali to Mexico, even if it were true, he says, would be less meaningful because the most significant Mesoamerican culture traits, worldview, calendars, deities, etc., can clearly be shown to have been present prior to that time. All right, that stuff is ancient here. It's in the codices, it's in the Popol Vuh, it's in our oral traditions, guys. It has an origin story to all these deities, calendars, and all that. It can clearly be shown to have been here prior to that time, and this violates a cardinal rule in the classic diffusionist argument that the diffuse traits must be present in the donor culture and absent in the recipient culture prior to the presumed contact. For the most part, our arguments will deal with this presumed earliest contact, because only contact at this stage of development might have been able to have a real impact on Mesoamerican cultures. There is still some question whether Egyptian contact with the Gulf Olmecs would have been sufficient to achieve this impact. So even if, let's say, we go with the fake story that Egyptians from another part of the world came here, even though we know ancient Egypt was here, why would it influence so much the culture and then they would leave again, right? But everything is unique to Americas. It's unique to the Americas, guys. Although some scholars still argue, like Deal and Co., that the Gulf Olmecs represent the mother culture of America, right? Hey, we're not in disagreement with that. I believe there was a couple mother cultures, definitely in Mesoamerica, and in South America, there's a whole other one. There's a lot of connections there with the Olmecs and their art resembling some of the ancient art of South America, right? The weird jaguars, all that. The mask. I mean, check out my out of Olmec theory video, please. All right, there's 3 parts of that. Others among them, Flannery and Marcus, prefer the term sister cultures. That's what I prefer, sister cultures. That's what I was just saying. Because it is clear that parallel developments were taking place in other regions of Mesoamerica, not just there, and also in South America, guys, what I was just saying. Claims that the Mesoamerican tradition began among the Mocaya of the Soconusco region of Chiapas, who by 1650 BC were the first to reach a chiefdom level and who influenced the subsequent Gulf Olmecs. Flannery and Marcus showed that the 8th degree west of true north orientation of ceremonial buildings and the use of stucco at La Venta and elsewhere appeared first in Oaxaca between 1650 and 1520 BC. Grove in 1989 has proposed that much of the iconography of the early formative is merely the first representation in ceramics of a body of belief shared by the common ancestors of many formative societies. And that's what we go over in my Out of Olmec Theory series. We show that there was all this influence also, not just from South America, but also in the region, that led to that, this culture, this creation of culture, and this the body of beliefs he's talking about. All right, and we go over these early formative, middle formative, later classic form, all that in my series by somebody who actually has a lot of knowledge, an anthropologist that they don't name here. Marcus claims that the earliest dated stone monuments appeared not in the Gulf Olmec zone, but in the Zapotec region of Oaxaca. Nevertheless, we will deal with the Gulf Olmecs because we agree with Tolstoy that by San Lorenzo times they had reached a point on the evolutionary scale that was beyond that of which San Jose, Oaxaca, or Tlaltico, central Mexico, can be placed. During the early formative, so they're saying from 1793 BC to 1011 BC, many of the definitive Mesoamerican traits were present both in the Gulf Coast Olmec and in other contemporaneous cultures. Because relatively little information is available about the Olmecs, Van Sertima is able to make iconographic claims which, if made for the Aztec, could be unequivocally disproved on the basis of texts and codices gathered after the conquest. All right. So let's see what he's going to say, right? Be ready to dodge some of the hijack, okay? I'll point it out. So continuing, he says here, the colossal Olmec heads, right? The main pieces of evidence represented or presented by Van Sertima are the monumental carved basalt Olmec heads. To a lay observer, it seems at first glance that these gray, black-looking heads with their thick lips and flat noses must be images of Africans. It has to be Africans. So remember, guys, that look is not unique to Africa. That look, and he's going to go over what he thinks why people had, flat noses and all that, which scientifically can make sense, So that could happen all over the world based on what he's going to say. But I just want to point that out because he's going to try to say, well, they weren't black because of this. All right. Because I kind of read a little bit of the article ahead, but I didn't read it all. All right. So this is the biggest evidence that Pan-Africans have. Ivan Van Sertima. It's just literally the looks of these stone heads, the looks. They're just going off the looks. That's the only evidence. They have no real proof, primary sources, ship navigational documents, nothing like that. Nothing in the Olmecs literature that said they came from Africa. Nothing. However, so it said this impression makes the other claims appear to be support for an obvious conclusion. However, this is a fundamental error. The people claimed by Van Sertima and other Afrocentrists to have influenced the Olmecs and to be models for the heads are Nubians or Egyptians, that is, North and East Africans. Listen, this is a big one. He's going to point something out here. Even though we know ancient Egypt was here, right? We're going to see what he says. Whereas the slave ancestors of African Americans came primarily from tropical West Africa. This is what I was just saying earlier. Nubians and Egyptians are in East Africa. It has nothing even to do with West Africans. When you're talking about that look, right? That West African look with big flat noses, thick lips, even though that's not a West African only look, right? And a lot of those West Africans ain't even from West Africa. A lot of them came from ancient America. A lot of them came from Asia, Arabia, Persia, Hindustan. We already went over that. We got videos on that, right? So he's pointing out something real here. Like, so these people that are supposed to be the models for the Olmecs by Ivan Ben Serma are said to be Egyptians, not West Africans. So why do they have the so-called West African look that you're trying to say is that look, right? This is what he's saying. These groups are very different and do not look alike. Flat noses are particularly inappropriate as racial markers because the shape of the nose is primarily a function of climatic factors, listen, such as the ambient temperature and the moisture content of the air. Listen, one of the functions of the nose is to moisten the air before it goes to the lungs. In areas where the air is very dry, such as deserts, pay attention, guys, a larger mucous area is required to moisten inspired air, and this necessitates a longer and narrower nose. Both the Olmecs and the West African ancestors of African Americans, listen to this, we got to touch the hijack a little, but right? So both the Olmecs and the West African ancestors of African Americans, this is what I was telling you, they're going still with the out of Africa theories. They're trying to say all black people in this article are from Africa. Remember, this was written in 1997. We got to touch the hijack. He's saying that all black folks have the same look, which is false. He's about to say it, have short, flat noses because they live in wet, tropical areas. So listen, this is a big one. That whole flat nose, thick, short, flat nose is usually associated to people who lived in tropical areas, not coming out of deserts like people of Egypt, all right? Like people of Egypt or in those areas of the Middle East. That's a big one right there. Pay attention. We have many tropical areas here, right? Don't we have so much tropical zones here in Americas? So literally you're letting us know that, yeah, America would develop people with those features. Pay attention, guys, right? If we're going with this, right, what he's saying about it depends on the climate, then obviously America had these type of looks and people with these looks because we have many tropical zones here in the Americas, right? Comparison of figures 1 and 2 with figures 3, 5 reveals that although these two groups differ in the shape of the nose and the lips, both are dolichocephalic and prognathous. All right, let's see what they're talking about. So this is figure 1, right? This is figure 1. And it says Peda man from Benin, West Africa, right? Benin, right? And then we go to figure 2. We got Aja man from Benin, right? You guys see that? That's a tropical zone, right? That's a tropical zone, right? Now look what he's gonna say. Now this is, right, in general, what they're calling a Nubian today or Egyptian, right? They're still melanated people. You got the woolly hair still, sort of like what Sudan, a lot of Sudanese people look, Ethiopian people look like. It says this is a Nubian from Koyeka, right? A Nubian from, look at his nose. Doesn't look like the Olmec heads, right? He's trying to make a point here, guys. He's trying to make a point here, guys. Now, I want to also read something to you that we've already gone over before. All right, real quick, right? Again, all skinfolk and kinfolk But we're going to go into real quick the Zondervan Bible or Pictorial Bible Dictionary, right? This is from 1963, this version of it, because a lot of the other versions or newer versions don't have the same definition, all right? And we're going to go into the definition of ham, right? Which is right here. This is about page 330 of this book. Let me just zoom in real quick right here. All right, let me just zoom in some more so you guys can see it really good. And it says here, ham, right? We know Ham is one of Noah's children, right? Supposedly all black folks come out of Ham. That's a lie. That's a big lie. It's going to tell you right here. It says, the youngest son of Noah, born probably about 96 years before the flood, and one of the 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dark races, but not the Negroes. Listen, not the Negroes, but the dark races, which includes what? But the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites. Okay? Who? Egyptians. Egyptians, same people Ivan Ben Sertima is saying came and became the models for the so-called Negroid heads of the Olmecs. But literally right here is telling you that Ham is the progenitor of the Egyptians and Ethiopians, but not the Negroes. But yeah, of the dark races, there's other dark melanated people around the world, guys. And then they're separating the so-called Negroes here. Do you guys see that? Make it make sense. All right. Again, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. All right. Let's go back. Again, we got a figure of a Nubian here from Koyeka. All right. You see? Now look at your typical so-called African American. All right. This is the stuff that Pan-Africans don't want to admit, don't want to be logical about. It even matches what that definition of Ham is saying. Not the Negroes, but the Egyptians. So again, ancient Egypt was here. We did have people that look like this in ancient America, though. And I do want you to really, really understand that. All right. We did have people that look like that here. There was many different phenotypes here. We did have deserts here, right? Don't we have deserts in America? And we do have tropical zones. So if it comes down to that, we can create many, many different phenotypes if it comes down to the weather and all that, right? Just like it says, Shem got the land where it was hot and cold. Shem, right? Shem. So we go back to the article again where we left off, and they were telling us to go look at the figures, that even though, you know, they're different. It says most of the colossal Olmec heads are not only 3 of the 16 Olmec heads show a degree of prognatism, right? It says figure 6.9 clearly shows that these heads do not resemble Nubians, having flat noses, thick lips, and epicantic folded eyelids, and lacking dolichocephaly or prognatism. Or for that matter, West Africans having epicantic folds and lacking dolichocephaly or prognatism. So a lot of them don't even look like the West Africans because of the eye part, he's saying. The people represented in the Olmec sculptures had short, round, flat faces with big lips, flat noses, and epicantic folds. That is, they resembled people who still live in the tropical lowlands of Mexico. Well, you know, he does show a little hijack picture here, but it does look like many so-called Black Americans, right? The Olmecs do look, and they look like also, they do resemble a lot of the people from Central America that you guys would call Mongoloid. They do have noses like that. A lot of them, they do have thick lips and the eyes folded like that. That's why we got to get out of that whole judging by looks. All right. Both may be right. Both of you might come from that people. Van Sertima places great emphasis on the Tres Zapotes head, also known as the Nestepe or Tuxtla head, because it has 7 braids dangling from the back, which he claims, citing no supporting evidence to be a characteristically Ethiopian hairstyle. All right, guys, you see what I'm saying? That's pseudo. That's what Ivan Ben Sertima and a lot of Pan-Africans are going off. Oh, that's African because it has braids. Can you guys believe that? Like literally, like I'm not like, come on, please think about that. Like what I'm trying to say here. Just because somebody has braids, does that mean they're from Africa or just Ethiopian? Does that mean they're from Africa just because somebody has braids? Come on now, guys. So that's so pseudo that Ivan Van Sertima kind of ran with that. And that's what he's using as proof. Oh, look, it has braids. Of course it's African. He also asserts that the braids are probably the best hidden secret in Mesoamerican archaeology. That the head was never published outside of Mexico. And that this photograph was kept in the dark. And I think the blackout was deliberate, he says, to support his claim. He quotes the Mexican Olmec scholar Beatriz de la Fuente, who states, if at any time one could imagine that there were Negroes in Mesoamerica, it would be after seeing head 2 of Tres Zapotes, the one that is most removed from the physiognomy of our Indian ancestors, right? There's the hijack. She's trying to base it off her looks and what. This is what I'm saying, guys. We got there's a little hijack on their side too. All right, because they don't look like you or what you think an Indian should look like. Well, maybe that's a Negro. Well, yeah, there was many so-called Negroes here in ancient America. That doesn't mean they have to be African. That doesn't mean you still have to believe Ivan Ben Sertima saying they were Africans, right? However, he overlooks her comment on the next page that certainly the colossal heads do not represent individuals of the Negro or Ethiopian race, as Jose Melgar, the first Westerner to see one more than 100 years ago, supposed. We have to agree that in them are recorded on a heroic scale the ethnic characteristics of the ancient inhabitants of Mesoamerica, characteristics that are still present in some contemporaneous natives. Some, huh? Some. Or how about in many so-called African Americans or Afro Mexicans or Afro Costa Ricans or Afro, Brazilians, Afro Dominicans, Afro Puerto Ricans, right? That whole Afro word. Now, real quick, let's look at some of these stone heads, right? They got here. Look at this. All right. That's a figure 7 monument in San Lorenzo, side views, right? And then we got this side over here. And this is what they're talking about, the eyelid. Almost like, also like a lot of the Asians have that. But that's not an Asian look either. That's what I'm saying, guys. This is monument 8 or monument 17 in San Lorenzo. And then down here we got some more. All right, look at that. Pretty cool side views with their sports helmets on. They're ball players, most likely. Literally ball players. These are ball players, right? These were your heroes back then. Superheroes, right? Monument 17, San Lorenzo. Okay. Going back to the article. It says here, archaeological evidence. Some Olmec heads are dark, not because they represent black people, but because they were made of dark stone. Now this is a funny comeback, a rebuttal they have in this article. That's a funny one, right? Not because, duh, so what? So what? If Loockert is correct and the Olmecs associated, volcanoes with rain and fertility, then volcanic rocks, basalt, jade, and serpentine would have had symbolic importance and would have been appropriate for important sculptures. That doesn't debunk that they weren't Negroid. Just because they're using black stone is not because they're black folks. That was a really dumb rebuttal by this article, right? This is what I'm saying, guys. Be ready to dodge some of the hijack on both sides. These heads represent an enormous amount of work, having been transported from quarries as much as 70 kilometers away, without the use of wheels or beasts of burden, and then carved with stone tools, bronze and iron being unknown. That's the hijack. See, this is what I'm saying. Bronze Age was started because of the copper mine from Michigan, guys. The Bronze Age was literally because of the copper mine in Michigan. We did have iron here, all right? We did have iron here. Metallurgy came out of the Americas. We have a whole encyclopedia that's called American Indian Contributions to the World. Encyclopedia of American Indian and Metallurgy is one of those, all right? That started here. The implication that Afrocentrics draw from this is that the Egyptian civilization was so superior that the Olmecs regarded its black representatives almost as gods and dropped whatever they were doing to devote enormous effort over many years to quarrying transporting and carving their likeness, right? So that's why they did them, because they thought they were like gods, not because they were ball players winning games and saving people's lives and avoiding wars. And, just picture like a LeBron James back then, a superstar, Michael Jordan back then, actually playing a game, but playing for your whole town or your whole city, your whole civilization, so they wouldn't be conquered by another one. These are your heroes, man. Imagine him winning that game, the winning shot, right? These are your heroes and warriors as well, probably. So his whole excuse that, oh, they represented them, even though they're not them, because he did say that in his book, it's not that they're them, they just represented the Nubians. And they don't, first of all, Egypt was here, and they don't look like desert people, right? Van Sertima's description of the contact between the Nubian Egyptians and the Olmecs makes it appear as if the Olmec civilization arose suddenly after the period in question. However, the civilization of the Olmecs had a long period of gestation in situ. San Lorenzo was occupied from the beginning of the formative, 1793 BC, and Levanta was occupied from 1658 BC onward. San Lorenzo flourished from 1428 to 1011 BC, a period characterized by three-dimensional monumental sculptures, including the colossal heads. There was also a San Lorenzo phase at La Venta, 1150 to 800 BC, during which monumental sculpture was produced. La Venta rose to prominence during the Middle Formative, 905 to 400 BC, a period characterized by low relief sculptures. Although the exact dating of the colossal heads is a complex matter, they pose a serious chronological problem for Van Sertima's hypothesis, all right? This is the stuff he leaves out, the stuff that Pan-Africans don't want to see. To date, 17 heads have been found, 10 in San Lorenzo, 4 in La Venta, 2 in Tres Zapotes, and 1 in Cobata. The majority of the heads in San Lorenzo were found in a ravine where they were deposited by erosion, have no clear stratigraphic association, and were dated by iconographic cross ties. However, 16 other monuments had stratigraphic associations, placing them in the final stages of the San Lorenzo B phase, and therefore, Coe and Diel, right, and conclude that these heads cannot be younger than 1011 BC. However, San Lorenzo heads 6, 7, and 8 have original placements. Now remember, guys, they're going off radiocarbon here. Remember what we already learned about radiocarbon. We can't really trust that. It might be even older. It might be even older or even younger, but almost likely older. And we can't really trust their carbon radio dating, right? And ciphers has radiocarbon dated, like I just said, the undisturbed context of head 7 and found it to be older than 1011 BC. So look what they're testing. They're finding the dirt that's around it, not the actual heads. This is what they do in radiocarbon. They test the leaf that fell on the pyramid, not the actual pyramid, right? She concludes, on the basis of the uniformity of sculpting technique and style, that all these heads fall within the early formative. A number of Olmec heads may be even older than they seem. Like I just said, they're probably older. Porter, 1989, has good evidence that many were made by recarving massive thrones and speculates that a ruler's throne was recarved into his image after his death. Wow. The excavators of La Venta also considered the heads to belong to the early formative, that is, earlier than 1011 BC. Although this cannot be proven because they were relocated to a middle formative context. Lowe states that many Olmec specialists consider most of all of the colossal heads to have been made in the early formative. De La Fuente speaks of a point that everyone who has dealt with the problem agrees on. All the heads were carved during a relatively short period that varies between 100 and at the most 200 years, because it is impossible to date all the heads unequivocally. One cannot prove that the San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes heads were contemporaneous. All right? This is what I was just saying about how they date the radiocarbons. They try to put set dates. They can't prove that stuff, guys. They might have been sequential, and carbon might have extended into the middle formative. However, Cypher's definitive dating of San Lorenzo Head 7 proves that Negroid-looking heads were being carved, mutilated, and buried between 1428 and 1011 BC. That is prior to 1200 BC, and centuries before the alleged arrival of Van Sertima's Nubian voyagers. All right, centuries before. Remember, Van Sertima said, "Oh, they came in 700 BC," and then he had to switch that up later on in his later editions. These heads, even in their own hijacked radiocarbon datings, are much older than when Van Sertima was saying these so-called Egyptians came, and we already know ancient Egypt was here, so that gets thrown out the window anyways, right? Van Sertima's postulated crew included Phoenicians because of their sailing expertise and because he had identified a carved portrait of a Phoenician merchant captain on his stela at La Venta. Listen, this is what he's going off saying, oh, Phoenicians might have come here. They're going off a phenotype of somebody, a stone. This is what we were talking about the other day when we were showing the terracotta, right? Where they're saying, oh, that looks Phoenician. Oh, that looks Semitic. That's that Semitic look, right? Beard and an aquiline nose. Come on, guys. We had all these phenotypes here. This whole time, Ivan Van Sertima has been going off some pseudo theories, some conjectures. He's literally been going off conjectures this whole time. Oh, I found a Phoenician. Where? At La Venta. Why? Oh, because I found this stone or terracotta showing what appears to me Semitic-looking people. That must be Phoenician. Either way, ancient Phoenicians or seafarers came out of the Americas, guys. So all that gets canceled out, thrown out the window, man. America's the true old world, right? I know I'm repeating myself all the time, but it's just to help the new people and just to make points, right? It's so pseudo. This book that he wrote was so biased, afrocentric, so biased, so biased. Unfortunately, this Phoenician could not have been a shipmate of the Nubians in 1200 or 700 BC because Coptic stelae were produced during the Middle Formative period several hundred years later than the colossal heads. In addition to seeing Negroid traits in the Olmec stoneheads, Van Sertima tries to establish parallels between the pyramid complexes of the Nile Valley and the mounds or platform structures at La Venta. References are made to the north-south orientation of pyramids, to step pyramids, to their astronomical alignment, to the dual function of pyramids as both tomb and temple, to a system of drains, moats, and sacred pools, to the complex of walls which surrounded the ceremonial precincts, and to the fact, in parentheses, that the Olmec pyramid, in parentheses, complexes appear for the first time during the alleged contact period. He made that all up. And he's just saying, oh, he's literally trying to say that all that stuff, all that technology of building came from Africa. That's his proof. Oh, yeah, because I found a system of drain. I found moats. I found also sacred pools. So that has to be Africans. That's literally what he wrote in his book, guys. We had that here, guys, in the true old world. We had all that technology, architectural knowledge. Toltec, Toltecans were very architectural. We read about Lake Titicaca and Tiwanaku, right, in Bolivia. All these major megalithic temples in the Brazilian forest. We know about all the pyramids of Mexico. Come on now, guys. We had all this, the canals, all these canals, right, in Southwest and the Amazon and South America. Come on, guys. That's so pseudo for him to say, oh, just because he found that stuff here, or even a pyramid complex, that it had to be African. I hope you guys see the hijack in that book now. In drawing these parallels, Van Sertima is suggesting that the Olmecs were influenced by Egyptian and Nubian architecture. But the evidence from the archaeological sites themselves fails to support this assertion in several important ways. Well, first of all, we know ancient Egypt was here, so that's all pseudo. But let's see what they're going to say in the article. For example, large pyramids were not being built in Egypt or in Nubia at the end of the 13th century BC. All right. All right. That's a fact. The great age of pyramid building had ended much earlier. All right. That's if we go with the false story. What if the pyramids over there were built in the 1700s and 1800s, right? much, much later. We're talking about those ones they show in Giza, right? That's a theme park over there. Shout out to UBTB again. The last step pyramid was built in 2680 BC, and the last large regular pyramid was Ken Jeffers in 1777 BC. In 1200 BC, the Egyptians either buried their dead in secret, as was the case with all the pharaohs of this period, or constructed small tombs that might incorporate small pointed pyramids into their overall design. So that's funny because Ben Sertima is even debunking himself there by trying to say, well, they came and built these large pyramids here in America, but by that time, supposedly, in their official story, so-called ancient Egyptians over there, the fake ones, had already stopped doing that. So it makes no sense what he's saying. Why would they continue it over here and not where they were coming from, right? Even though that's a theme park over there, and we would say that's all geopolymer. Shout out to Paul Cook. He proved that's all geopolymer. That's a theme park over there. I would say that's one of the first world fairs where they were teaching an ancient history, kind of like what the world fairs were doing in a distorted way, right? In a distorted way, yeah, that's what they were doing, fooling people. They had to have world fairs before the actual world fairs we know about, guys. I really believe that. All of these tombs, such as those at Deir el Medina, were quite small, and none of them were more than about 20 feet in height. The evidence for Van Sertima's other presumed contact period, the late 8th and early 7th century BC, is likewise problematical or non-existent. Non-existent. The Egyptians continued to bury their dead in secret or constructed the same kinds of diminutive tombs with small pointed pyramids, and they had built in the 13th century BC in Nubia. Pyramids were built for the first time at El Kurru in 751 BC, but these structures were also quite small and bore no resemblance to the rectangular, oval, or conical mounds or platform structures built by the Olmecs. Mounds, right? Don't forget the Olmecs had mounds too, guys. They're mounds. Like their Egyptian counterparts of the same period, the Nubian pyramids were generally tall and pointed, with an average slope of 60 to 70 degrees and an average base of 30 to 40 square feet. The Nubian pyramids were also connected to small Egyptian-style mortuary temples, which faced southeast, in contradiction to Van Sertima's claim that all such structures had a north-south orientation. You see, he made that up. He generalized. He got caught, man. The Nubian pyramids were also built with gravel, sandstone, and solid stone masonry. All right, we would say geopolymer, and contained burial chambers in which were found figurines, painted mortuary scenes, written texts, and other artifacts in the Egyptian and Egypto-Nubian. In contrast, the Olmec structures were built of different layers of carefully selected earth and clay in various colors, and were apparently used primarily for ceremonial and religious rituals rather than for the burial of the dead. All right. They also lack any evidence of figurines, painted mortuary scenes, written text, or any other artifact in the Egyptian or Egypto-Nubian style. All right. Again, that came much later. They're just copying. The Olmec mounds or platform structures of the Middle Formative were relatively large compared with the Nubian pyramids of the same period. At La Venta, now remember, we got to believe in their false chronology. They always try to, ours could be actually way older than what they're saying, Middle Formative and so-called Egypt over there, which a lot of us think was built much more recently in history, guys. All right, so again, that's the hijack with the chronologies. We're just reading the article from 1997. He's still debunking them, though, even with their false history. He's using their own false history to debunk them. At La Venta, they were mostly 200 to 400 square feet, rectangular structures with sloping sides and flat tops, which apparently served as platforms for temples and other structures made of thatch or some other perishable material. There were also courtyards, plazas with palisades, and circular, oval, or pentagonal mounds, but none of these structures resembled the Nubian pyramids and their affiliated buildings. The La Venta step pyramid, although deeply eroded and cone-like, is 120 feet high and has a base diameter of 420 feet. Van Sertima continues to use an old photograph of an outdated reconstruction of this edifice to insist that it was a four-sided pyramid comparable to those built by the ancient Egyptians. an old photograph where she's trying to say, oh, look at this angle. It looks like the one. Look at just look right there. By the ancient Egyptians and Nubians. Hyper-diffusionists, all right? These diffusionists never giving credit to ancient America. They always try to say people came from other parts of the world and civilized us. They created that most ancient civilization in the world here, but they came from somewhere else, right? Make it make sense. So the hyper-diffusionists often complain that establishment scholars dogmatically refuse to admit that pre-Columbian context occurred at all. You see, but this is not the case. It is not generally accepted that Vikings came to the New World about AD 1044. This acceptance is based on several genuine Scandinavian artifacts found by Ingstad in a well-conducted archaeological dig at La Anse aux Meadows, Newfoundland, and dated to approximately AD 1044. All right, so again, we've gone over that research as well. We know that a lot of these so-called Scandinavian people most likely have ancient American Indian heritage, and that a lot of their people actually came out of America. Again, who crossed the Atlantic first based on the history of navigation, based on the favorable winds and the currents that go into those parts of the world? It was most likely an American Indian. And this is confirmed by a historian of navigation. We've gone over this already. The archaeological discoveries at La Anse aux Meadows validated the sagas of Leif Erikson and Barne Hiddleshoff, describing their round-trip expedition to the New World. Around Leif Erikson, again, son of Eric the Red, right? Eric the Red, so-called Red Man, the Red Man. Why was he called the Red? Leif Erikson is his son, just coming back. They already knew America was here. This is Greater Ireland. This is those mythical lands, right? They were always talking about in their own sagas that we're reading about right here. We got a breakdown of this too, guys. And we're going to get more breakdowns, more videos of that, all right? Which scholars had regarded skeptically prior to archaeological corroboration. There are no such written records of the return of any expedition from Africa, listen, to the New World. So even what he's trying to point out, that the Scandinavians have better evidence that they were coming here back and forth than Africans. There's no record that any African came to America and then came back. Van Sertima dismisses the Viking contact. See, because Vikings are supposed to be white, Van Sertima was like, no, it was us first. It was us, not Vikings. But we know, yeah, so-called Vikings or these dark Danes, Danite Danes, were going back and forth, and that probably their ancestors, a lot of them were actually from ancient America who had gone to that area of the world, Scandinavia, right? Before that, they were just coming back. They were just doing trade back and forth. The Vikings brought no new plant, influenced no act, introduced no ritual, left no identifiable trace of their blood in the Native Americans. How do they know all this stuff, right? Because remember, they're basing that of what Native Americans are supposed to look like. What do they know what an ancient Viking looked like, right? Like waves, they broke for a moment on alien sands and then receded. What must be remembered is that not a single authentic African artifact has ever been found in a controlled archaeological context, and therefore the evidence for a Viking presence in pre-Columbian America is much stronger than all the supposed claims for a Nubian or African influence. All right. And Van Sertima tries to neglect that. Yeah, all these Pan-Africans try to neglect that. Furthermore, if in fact all we had was an African site comparable to La Anse aux Meadows, there would be little interest in afrocentric circles for writing books about it. Their political agenda, right? Van Sertima had an agenda. These Pan-Africans have an agenda. This political agenda is not just to show that Africans arrived in the New World sometime in the past, but that being a superior civilization, they deeply influenced the native cultures. That's the hijack they try to say, you know? When two cultures meet, there is a reciprocal exchange of words, foods, and customs. But one searches in vain for examples in Van Sertima of Nahuatl words or Mesoamerican beliefs in African cultures, right? Wouldn't they trade ideas? Wouldn't they trade cultures if they were meeting? That's a good point. He does argue for a pre-Columbian introduction of maize into Africa. So guys, come on now. This is what I've been saying since day one. My corn videos are one of the oldest videos or series I have. If you follow corn, we know corn was in West Africa. We know corn is all over the hieroglyphics in so-called ancient Egypt, over there in the drawings. We know corn is ancient American, it's a native plant to America. That means we came from here. We spread out over there. So even though Van Sertima says, yeah, they had corn in ancient West Africa. So where did they get it from, man? But given the speed with which maize and cassava became staples after the Portuguese introduced them into Africa, a pre-Columbian introduction should have produced a much wider distribution and importance than what Van Sertima claims. Okay, so that's kind of true, but we do know that corn was making its way with ancient Americans going over to Africa. Yes, they were bringing the corn over there, helping them become civilized. You know, continues says here botanical evidence. If no genuine artifacts are found, the next most credible evidences for contact between peoples are plants. But as in all these diffusionist arguments, the temporal sequence must be correct. The plant in question must be shown to have been used or domesticated earlier in the proposed place of origin than in the proposed destination. This is not the case for African plants. Again, 600 out of 640 food crops in Africa originated in America, guys. Baker summarizes his discussion of possible contacts thus: on present evidence, it can hardly be said that cultivated plants of the New World provide a foundation for the belief that there were important cultural exchanges between the Americas and the Old World in pre-Columbian days. A volume devoted specifically to the question of pre-Columbian contacts, in which a number of proponents of contact, including several upon whom Van Sertima relied for botanical evidence, participated, concludes as follows. The consensus of botanical evidence given in the symposium seems to be that there is no hard and fast evidence for any pre-Columbian introduction of any single plant or animal across the ocean from the Old World to the New World, or vice versa, from that side over here, right? But there is evidence of corn, squashes and things like that. A lot of fruits, pineapples, bananas going over there. There is evidence for that. We've shown it. But when it comes to foods coming from over there into the Old World, into here, America, the true Old World, they don't really have proof of that stuff, guys. Again, most of the foods in the world are actually native to America, so they can't prove that. This is emphatically not to say that it could not have occurred. The situation with regard to the evidence has not changed since 1971. By AD 1400, Africans were growing 5 sets of domesticated crops. Plants first domesticated in the Near East, which were grown in North Africa, including Egypt: wheat, barley, peas, and beans. We have all that here. Plants domesticated in Sahel zone of North Africa: cotton, sesame, watermelon, sorghum, and pearl millet. We had watermelon here too in ancient America. They try to say we didn't. Trust me, got a whole video coming up on that. Cotton, we had the biggest trade of cotton in Caral Supe in Peru. Come on, guys, like this is American stuff, which became staples in sub-Saharan Africa. So that proves that we did go over there. Plants domesticated in the wet tropical climate of West Africa: Africa jam, rice, oil palm, cola nut. Plants domesticated and found only in Ethiopia: finger millet, nug, and teff. And finally, plants imported to Madagascar by the Southeast Asians who first settled that island: bananas, Asian jam, taro, Asian rice. We will not discuss the last two groups. Plants were first domesticated in the Near East. All right, that's the hijack. They're going to go with their Mesopotamia, cradle of civilization theory. I hate this part, right? And they're saying it spread from there to other areas. So that's the hijack. That was here, the cradle of life. We're talking about food. When we come to food, again, a lot of those foods originated here, guys. Farming villages first appeared in the Nile Valley of Egypt. That's the hijack. Come on now. Farming village, look what they're saying, between 5,000 and 4,500 BC, when we got fossilized corn from that time here. We got fossilized squash in North America. We're talking about 8,000 BC, guys. Yes, fossilized corn, squash, things like that. Over here, they found. So that's the hijack with that. And Egypt is here. They're just going off what their written records, but they were talking about the Americas when they talked about the geography. This is so-called Kemet. Kemet means rich, black, fertile soil. We have some of the best fertile soil in the world. And the food is proven to be from here. So that's a hijack saying farming villages and all that started over there. This part right here is crazy. The earliest known wheat and barley in Africa were found in the Fayum and are dated about 4400 BC. In the Sudan, a site dated about 4800 BC showed evidence of the use of wild plants, but not of cultivated forms. All right, not of cultivated forms. In the Sahara, the herding of cattle, sheep, and goats, as well as the intensive use of wild sorghum and millet was seen at the earliest by 6000 BC, with domestication taking place sometime after that. All right, they don't have physical proof of this. This is just based on written stuff. They don't have no fossilized stuff of this over there, guys. I just wanted to point that out. Beringholt, Sonnery, Holmes point out that the time and place of origin of rice, sorghum, and common millet and cotton are only partially understood, but that agriculture came much later to sub-Saharan Africa. See, he just admitted they don't know the place of origin of rice and cotton and sorghum. We had rice here, guys, too. We had cotton here, of course. And he just said it's partially understood. We don't know the origin. It's only partially understood. They can't prove it yet. They haven't really proved it. They'll say Asia. This is Asia too. America is Asia. So what's Asia? Asia Major, Asia Minor. Domesticated plants are well documented in West Africa, only from 1200 BC onward. Buringholt summarizes, whenever various African plants were domesticated, plant cultivation was largely, if not entirely, restricted to the northwestern and southeastern parts of sub-Saharan Africa until between 500 BC and 300 BC. That's very recent, guys. We're talking about thousands of years here that they're finding fossilized food here, thousands of years before that. After the 1st century AD. And not only that, but evidence of agriculture around the mounds and Caral Soupe, like evidence of agriculture, large agricultural evidence. The great, after the 1st century AD, the great Bantu expansion. Where were the Bantu coming from, guys? Where were the Bantu people? We got videos, they were coming from Persia, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, all these places, guys. That's where they were really coming from. They're not even African. So they even telling you this expansion is because they were expanding coming in from Asia. They did go into the Sahara and then went into Central and West Africa. But they're not originally from there. They're not part of the original people of Africa. And spread their domesticated plants across the continent. So these are the people bringing this domestication that are not even from Africa. Since plant domestication in the New World began 7,000 BC. Come on. This is what I was just saying earlier. All right, so kill all that noise about plants originating. He just said earlier, right in the same article, that it started in the Near East over there, right? And that the first farming villages were 4,000. You just said right now, plant domestication began in the New World 7,000 BC. This is what I'm saying. We got fossilized evidence of this. It is clear that only Egypt and Sahel are areas in which domestication preceded or was contemporaneous with that in the New World. And again, this is Egypt. This is Egypt, so it's the same place. So it never started over there in that desert, in that dry place. Come on now, use your logic. That's a desert over there. This is Egypt. Or was contemporaneous? No, you're just going with the mainstream academia because you write this article in a scholarly journal, and that's the agreed place consensus that that's where the cradle of life is, and that's wrong. They got no evidence of that. When you just said domestication 7,000 BC, we know corn 10,000 BC. We got proof of it, fossilized stuff of this things, and archaeological zones showing where they were doing agriculture in these same time periods, guys. It is clear that only Egypt is here, right? With that in this new world, and that sub-Saharan African agriculture is too recent. It's too recent. Sub-Saharan African agriculture is too recent to have been a source of domesticated plants in the new world. All right. So Van Sertima's using that as one of the evidences gets debunked so bad. The only plants that really require discussion are cotton, the bottle gourd, and maize. Come on now. We had all that here. This is what I'm saying. Maize and cotton, come on now. The bottle gourd, although not a food plant, was domesticated early because of its usefulness as a container. The wild gourd is endemic to tropical Africa and originated there. Okay, maybe. However, cultivated bottle gourd earlier than 7000 BC were recovered in the Ocampo caves in Mexico. Okay, you just contradicted yourself. This is what I'm saying. He just said it originated there, but they found earlier forms of it, 7000 BC in Mexico. So make it make sense. Come on, guys. I hope you see the contradiction right there. All right. You see, I'm not just making things up when I say, oh, we had all that here earlier. He just proved it. You just proved it right there, man. You just contradicted yourself. You just debunked yourself, Mr. Article Writers. You mean it started in Mexico then if it's earlier than 7000 BC? Were recovered in Ocampo caves in Mexico, right? And you got all these sources confirming that, while the oldest cultivated forms in South America date about 3000 BC. Lannan reported as much an earlier site, but the gourds they were probably gathered rather than cultivated. Remains of El Cicerdaria were found in Egyptian tombs dated about 3500 BC. Yeah, didn't they find also cocaine in these mummies? Didn't they find that? And now remember, we're going off of radiocarbon that they are very biased about when it comes to those mummies over there. They probably much earlier. I'm sorry, much recent than we think, because we got to trust in the carbon dating that tries to make all our stuff newer and all the stuff in the other part of the world older just to fit the false narratives of history, guys. There's a big conspiracy on that, and we've shown that. Thus, gourds were cultivated in the New World much earlier than in Egypt. Much earlier than in Egypt. Body bag for the illusion. Yo, shout out to Drop, yo. Whitaker and Carter have shown that gourds can float for as long as a year without the seeds losing the capacity to germinate. If a gourd on its arrival in the New World was tossed up on the beach by a storm and broken so that the seeds could escape, or picked up by a curious person and transported inland, the gourd would spread. There is no need to posit human transport to the New World for this plant. Additionally, it makes little sense for persons accidentally making a sea voyage to load up the boat with these bulky, nearly inedible fruits. The presence of the gourd in the New World predates any domestication in West Africa. Cotton presents a number of problems. There are 4 species of cultivated cotton. African cotton and Asian cotton have 13 large chromosomes, and the New World species Hirsutum of Central American origin and Gibardens originating in South America have 26. All right, more chromosomes. Listen, it has more chromosomes than the ones over there. 13 large and 13 small chromosomes. Since no cotton with 13 large chromosomes is found in the New World, and no cotton with only 13 small chromosomes is native to the Old World, the New World tetraploid context must have arisen from a hybridization in a New World species with an Old World species, leading to a doubling of the chromosome number. The question is how and when is this hybridization took place? Van Sertima argues following Stevens that cotton seeds would not have floated and retained their viability long enough to cross the Atlantic or the Pacific, although they could have made journeys of up to 1,000 miles. He then argues that the seeds of the African diploid cotton could not have drifted by themselves across the ocean, but had to come to the New World in the hands of African men. Dodge the hijack. So guys, remember, this is the true Old World. We were much more connected to other parts. The lands were more connected. We were going out of here, hybridizing, bringing back stuff. You know, this is all the stuff they leave out of this, right? It says African man bearing cottons made the drift journey to Americas in the 4th millennium. That's what Van Sertima was saying. With no proof. In considering this argument, temporal relationships must again be examined. The earliest G. herbarium in Africa was found in Alfia, Egyptian Nubia, where cotton seeds and lint hairs intermediate between those of wild forms and those of cultivated species were obtained, but there was no sign of weaving at that time. 12 fragments dated to 3000 BC have been found in the Indus Valley. These dates are later than the dates for New World cottons and violate the temporal sequence rule for diffusion, right? Those are much later than basically it's older here, what he just said. and the ones in India, so-called Hindustan, right? Junius Bird found evidence for the long use of cotton textiles at Huaca Prieto, Peru, right? We had cotton clothing here. This is what I'm saying. Caral Supe, since ancient times, ancient cotton trade, guys, going around the world. Go check out the documentary we showed on that, please, that I have on my channel. The oldest archaeological remains containing cotton cloth fibers and bowl fragments come from Tehuacan, Mexico. Listen, dated about 3500 BC. Phillips, Wendell, Brooker, and Percival point out that this cotton was fully domesticated and does not represent the earliest domestication of G. surtum. Points out that wild G. surtum has been found on islands in the Caribbean and in Yucatan, and that G. barbadense is found on the coast of Ecuador and Peru, the wild form of the Galapagos Islands. Okay. Baker concludes that all of this evidence suggests that man had nothing to do with the origins of tripletoid cotton. All right. Basically, that Africans didn't come here and create that, but that he domesticated Hirsutum and barbadensis separately in the New World. It's a local product, by local people, not by Africans. The time involved in forming hybrids and subsequently diffusing these tetraploid species as widely as they are found means that the time of initial hybridization was thousands of years prior to Van Sertima's postulated 4th millennium BC, all right? Thousands of years before Van Sertima claims Africans came. Thousands of years, guys, all right? All right? Van Sertima is being debunked so much. Cytogenetic studies by Phillips do not support the theory of recent origin of New World cottons, all right? It's not a recent origin, it's old. Even Stevens, upon whom Van Sertima relies, argued that cotton seeds would have been transported by some form of natural raft, and points out that an exclusively wild tetraploid species, G. tomentosum, probably derived from an ancestor in Mexico, not from Africa, Mexico, and somehow become established in Hawaii. We went from here to over there, bringing it again, that to Hawaii. Listen, a much longer distance than the one involved in transatlantic crossing. The Jody and Wendell cite studies by Frixell on the seed and capsule buoyancy and saltwater tolerance of Gossypium, a number of wild populations separated by salt water, and concluding that oceanic dispersion of this genus had been important. Stevens also mentions research by Vernon Proctor, who fed wild cotton seeds to killdeers and showed that the seeds were retained in their guts for days without loss of viability. Van Sertima does not quote Stevens' conclusion. Because of the possibilities of natural and accidental dispersal, one is forced to the conclusion that the geographical distribution of the wild forms of cotton per se cannot be used critically as supporting evidence for early transoceanic cultural contacts. Archaeological evidence of spindle whorls, cordage, fabrics, or any other artifact indicating the use would be far more satisfactory. As we have noted, this is precisely the point. No such artifact has ever been found. Citing Stevens, Van Sertima argues that feral cotton found in the Cape Verde Islands is derived from New World cotton introduced by the Portuguese from Guinea in AD 1462. We actually know there's a cotton that was found in ancient Cape Verde before. This is what I'm saying. 1462 was before Columbus came, right? They had found cotton there from the New World, guys. We were going over to Cape Verde. Yeah, American Indians were going to Cape Verde bringing cotton, guys. We've gone over this information in my Cape Verde video. This proves, according to Van Sertima, that round trips to the New World took place before Columbus. Yeah, but the origin was from America. That's the only hijack. He tries to say it was Africans. Stephen points out, however, that the Portuguese introduced many New World crops into Cape Verde Islands in the 16th century, and that New World cotton could also have been introduced after Columbus' voyage. Could have. No, it was actually there, guys. It's part of the history there in Cape Verde. It's actually there. It was there in 1462. It was already there. This is before Columbus. Van Sertima relies extensively on Jeffries, who claims that the Arabs had made a round trip to the New World and introduced maize to Africa prior to AD 1492. You see that? Why would, see, if we could navigate right? Why wouldn't we ourselves go everywhere else and introduce cotton? That's why they show these bird figures and these so-called Babylonian Anunnaki holding corn in the little seed bags, right? They're bringing civilization to the world because that's what helped people settle down and get civilized. Jeffrey's arguments are primarily linguistic and mythological, with little archaeological support, right? He's just guessing and conjecturing, and have been severely criticized because of this. No evidence that Arabs came here and then left. It was ancient Americans that left from here, guys, and introduced corn to the rest of the world. He concludes on the basis of an article by Lee that Van Sertima also cites that Arabs had crossed the Atlantic well before AD 1100 and also described maize. Lee identified the destination described in two Chinese texts dated AD 1175 and 1225 as Maracaibo, Venezuela. Right? He also identified melons. So this literally what that means is that we were leaving from Venezuela going over to China and all these other places, right? And introducing maize. I mean, we check out my corn videos, guys, please. They had corn in the old world. Corn is native to the Americas. We brought it out, not anybody coming here and then leaving. We had our own navigation. Navigation started here. We had our own navigation. We would go and do that. He also identified melons described as 6 feet round. Listen, enough for a meal for 20 or 30 men, as pumpkins and grains of wheat, 3 inches long, as kernels of large seeded Andean flour maize. All right, all that coming out of here. How anyone could take as fact rather than as fanciful invention pumpkins 6 feet in diameter is beyond us. Mangelsdorf points out that the proposed Andean maize is in fact post-Columbian and is not found in plant remains in archaeological sites or depicted in prehistoric ceramics. Although corn is particularly well suited to be preserved archaeologically and has been found in abundance throughout its range in the New World, right? Fossilized is what I'm saying, including the wet tropics. Not a single corn cob unmistakably pre-Columbian has yet been found in any part of the old world. Maybe they've been hiding it. But the drawings and depictions of corn over there does exist. Corn was grown in Spain by 1498. Giovanni Ramusio saw it growing in Venice in 1554, and by 1560 the Portuguese were growing it in the Congo. Mani, citing an AD 1605 report by Peter de Mares that he considers to be the first true reference to maize in Africa, argues that maize was brought by the Portuguese from the West Indies to Sao Tome and then transmitted to the coast. Sao Tome, one of their main islands where they got slaves from to bring over here, right? Supposedly, again, Cape Verde and Sao Tome, these are two places that were bringing Indians, so it makes sense that there was corn introduced there first, right? It all makes sense when you start really doing all the research and putting it all together, guys. And to other parts of Africa after 1550. And considering the rapidity with which the cultivation of corn was diffused throughout Africa after its introduction by the Portuguese, Miracle's observation that regardless of how long maize may have been established in Eastern Africa, it was little observed before the end of the 16th century is quite revealing. All right. The debunking Van Sertima's plant evidence of Africans coming, all right? That whole article. All right, I hope you guys understood that. Now we go into mummification. We already know the oldest mummies are from America, so let's see what they got to say. Now, Van Sertima continues to claim that the Egyptians brought mummification to the New World, all right? So obviously that gets debunked so badly. So badly, right? That's pseudo. This is what you guys have been following, all you Pan-Africans, Van Sertimas. They came before. This is what you've been following. First of all, ancient Egypt was here, and mummification started here. So that we know that's a lie. We already proved that. His only sources for this claim are the discredited hyper-diffusionist authors of the early 20th century, whom he quotes from Mackenzie. All of his citations, except for those that refer to Palenque, ultimately derived from Grafton Elliott Smith, a prolific hyper-diffusionist who believed that all civilization derived from Egypt, right? Dr. Hijack, this is Egypt, so maybe Egypt was in America, so we kind of agree there. You're just saying or misrepresenting it, right? Elliott Smith proposed that this Heliolithic culture had first spread to Asia and was taken from there to America. What Asia? Asia Major? Yeah, this is here, yeah. The diffusion of mummification from Egypt to the rest of the world was central to his thesis. This thesis was thoroughly demolished in 1928 by Roland B. Dixon, The Building of Cultures, a problem that Van Sertima ignores. Right? He left this out of his book, citing no original sources. Van Sertima claims we have indisputable proof of Mexican mummification. One of the best examples is the mummified figure in the sarcophagus at Palenque. 3 features of this Palenque burial indicate an Egyptian influence. What? The jade mask on the face of the dead. We had jade in abundance here, guys. So this is one of his proofs. The fact of mummification itself. The oldest mummies are from here, so that's not proof. That debunks his 2 theories right there. And the flared base of the sarcophagus. Nope. We had many bases that look like so-called Egyptian. They found in the mounds. They found in Central America. They found in South America. We got videos on that, right? So you see how he just debunked himself right there? That's so pseudo. Van Sertima used that as his evidence. Egyptians made sarcophagus with a flared base. This is what he was saying, to enable them to stand it up because their burials were vertical. The Mexicans, like the Nubians, buried in horizontal positions, yet at Palenque, the flared base is retained, although it serves no function. The retention of such a non-functional element is among the clearest indications of an influence. A borrowed artifact often goes through an initial period of slavish imitation before it is reconstructed to suit local needs, all right? So that didn't prove anything, guys. That's literally what his whole book is about, just pure conjecture. This is what Pan-Africans have been using this whole time, right? Oh, Africans were all over the world. You have just been going off pure conjecture and looks. Van Sertima is wrong on all counts. Every basic text on the Mayan states that the sarcophagus contained a skeleton, not a mummy. Thompson says that right, any interest party can verify this by looking at the photographs of Pacal's skeleton in the sarcophagus. The photograph has been published in this text. We got a good documentary on when they found Pacal's tomb. Go ahead and check that out too, guys. Make sure you catch up on all my videos from the past. From this or any other picture of the open sarcophagus, one can also verify that the flare base is in fact a widening of the open interior of the slab, not the bottom of the sarcophagus, or a slavish imitation of an Egyptian prototype. All right. For Van Sertima's claim to be true, it would have required the Mesoamericans to imitate the Egyptians from 800 BC until 683, almost 1,000 years, 1,500 years. All right. So it doesn't even match their chronology, right, that they have over there in fake Egypt. Without any evidence of an intervention being in culture, transmitting any trait, it should also be noted that jade death masks were never used by the ancient Egyptians. All right. Body bag for the illusion. You try to say that's the evidence because we had jade masks and you guys didn't even use that over there. But it was widely used over here. Widely. Finally, if the source of diffusion is the oldest place where the practice is found, perhaps travelers from the New World went to Egypt and taught them how to mummify the deceased. The oldest mummies in the world are those associated, listen, with the Chinchorro culture of Chile. And I have a video on this, guys. Catch up, please, so you can see. It's so pseudo what they're using. They're saying, oh, because they found mummies here, that means that they came from Africa. When we have the oldest mummies in the world, that practice was started here in the Americas, older than any other part in the world. So that debunks that. Again, the oldest mummies in the world are those associated with the Chinchorro culture of Chile. The oldest mummy there is dated, and this is a very low date. It's actually older, 5050 BC. This is 2,000 to 3,000 years earlier than in Egypt. Earlier, where artificial preservation of corpses began in the Old Kingdom. All right, okay, come on now, guys. Man, we've debunked this so much. And that's the end of the article. It goes on to other people's writings on what they think of Van Sertima, but that's basically the main part of this article, guys. I hope you guys see how pseudo it has been to believe what he's been using, Van Sertima, and a lot of the afrocentric people, right? They've been going off conjecture and biased beliefs, conjecture that nobody ever questioned because there was music to their ears, or because they were agents. They were plants to put here to trick you, right, into thinking everybody came out of Africa, which is a Darwinism theory based on Darwinism. Out of Africa is based on Darwinism, talking about coming out of apes, guys. Coming out of apes. Are you from apes? Are you from apes? So again, please make sure to check out all the videos I have here that I mentioned that relate to this. All right. Again, this was a article from the Current Anthropology Journal, volume 38, number 3 from June 1997. And it was called Robbing Native American Cultures, robbing the ancient cultures of the American Indians, right? Robbing the history, trying to Africanize it. Even all the diffusionists, even like in the book I read yesterday, right, that chapter, try to say it was somebody else that came here, built pyramids, somebody else that did this, somebody else, but never giving credit to the ancient Americans, robbing them of their history, all right? Robbing American Indian cultures, Banserma's Afrocentricity and the Olmecs, right? Afrocentric biased views, pseudo, no evidence, all right? I hope you guys enjoyed this reading, this presentation today, this video. There's a lot more.
Go fig. Follow me.